House Bill 562, a bill to be entitled an act to amend various firearm laws. General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
For what purpose does the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Schaefer, rise?
To debate the bill.
The lady has the floor to debate the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Before us today is House Bill 562. It's a bill entitled Amend Firearms Laws. On April 2nd, I, along with my fellow bill sponsors, Representative Berg, Cleveland, and Faircloth, filed this bill alongside of House Bill 563 in an effort to advance responsible firearms legislation that balances both our Second Amendment rights with the need for public safety when it comes to firearms. House Bill 563 now appears as Section 11 of the current bill, and as I walk you through the bill, there are quite a few sections. I do trust that you will see how we have achieved that balance by furthering Second Amendment protections for our law-abiding citizens in this state, while significantly strengthening background checks for individuals seeking to obtain firearms, both handguns and long guns alike. So with that, let me take you through section by section into the bill. Section 1, first of all, it expands the concealed handgun permit rights of certain officials and employees. In addition to the individuals that are already permitted to do so, such as judges, clerks of court, etc., this section permits DAs with a concealed handgun permit to carry a concealed handgun in a courtroom. It adds certain DPS employees and administrative law judges with concealed handgun permits to the list of exemptions, allowing them to carry concealed handguns in some places that the average person could not. Again, just building on the list of those unique exemptions for individuals, those certain officials. Also allows a person to carry a pocket knife in a closed position into the state capitol building. This really is a clarifying provision of what is already contained in the law, but is not quite clear. Finally, it authorizes legislators and legislative employees with valid concealed handgun permits to carry concealed in state legislative buildings and grounds. Section 2 is, again, a clarifying provision of something that was passed 2 years ago. It clarifies that individuals with concealed handgun permits who are carrying a concealed handgun on educational property, in compliance with the law, of course, may move a handgun from concealment on their person to a closed compartment and vice versa, even if it is momentarily not concealed. Section 3 provides an affirmative defense to possession of a handgun on educational property if that person was authorized to have the handgun in locked vehicle in the first place, a valid concealed handgun permit, etc., and they remove the handgun from the vehicle only in response to a threatening situation in which deadly force was justified to defend self or others. Importantly, that threat must be imminent. Moving on to Section 4, this authorizes it does not require, but it authorizes the Commissioner of Agriculture to prohibit the carrying of firearms on state fairgrounds during the state fair. Importantly, the state fair presents a very unique set of circumstances that we have looked at really over the last year, and find that we would like to give the Commissioner of Agriculture, whoever that is at the time, the ability to prohibit firearms there during that 2-week period of time if he or she sees fit. Again, law enforcement officers would be exempted, and individuals with concealed handgun permits would still be allowed to have the handgun in their locked vehicle. The section also, what it does is that it directs the Department of Agriculture in consultation with DPS and the North Carolina Sheriff's Association to study a method that would allow individuals with concealed handgun permits, a method for storing those handguns at the entrance to the state fair to really consider those issues of safety that they may or may not have going to and from their parked cars. Section 5 concerns shooting range protection. What it effectively does is that it gives all shooting ranges the same protections regardless of when they were established. It does so by expanding a Shooting Range Protection Act to provide that all shooting ranges are only subject to noise ordinances that were in effect at the time that shooting range was established. So again, it just puts all of these shooting ranges on the same playing field instead of only a certain number, those that were established before a certain date. Section 6 is a very important clarifying provision. It modifies our firearm rights restoration statute to ensure recognition of that restoration by federal law. This was brought to our attention by a recent case law that called that statute into question. So we want to make sure that when we are going through the process of an individual having their firearm rights restored, that is in fact recognized by federal law. So we wanted to make that clarification. Section 7 eliminates some of the misdemeanors from the list of misdemeanor convictions that prohibit a person from obtaining a concealed handgun permit. What it does is it makes most misdemeanor convictions only count against a person for 3 years, but what it does is that it leaves stalking convictions with a 5-year bar. I do want to draw special attention to the fact that domestic violence convictions and convictions for assault on a law enforcement officer, et cetera, a few other individuals are listed there, would remain a permanent bar for an individual who would like to obtain a concealed handgun permit. Section 8 permits the use of suppressors on short-barreled rifles for hunting. This provides safety, more stability for the individuals as they are hunting. Section 9 makes the offense of carrying a concealed handgun on private posted property an infraction punishable by a fine of up to $500. Section 10 repeals the pistol purchase permit requirement effective October 1st, 2021. Pending the repeal, however, the bill would make the following changes to the statutes governing the pistol purchase permit system that we have. Beginning October 1st, 2018, it would allow a NICS check, that's a National Instant Criminal Background Check, when purchasing a pistol from a federally licensed firearm dealer in lieu of a pistol purchase permit or a concealed carry permit. It also specifies that the sheriff may only consider an applicant's conduct or criminal history for the past 5 years when determining good moral character under the statutes. It also provides for a better appeals process when determining if a permit has been denied and the individual feels that their rights have been denied, then there's the better appeals process. Also, it requires DPS in consultation with the Sheriff's Association to develop a permit application form, and it would require all sheriffs to use that form to promote some uniformity of application across the state. Finally, it would require a person or entity presented with a mental health release form to promptly provide court orders concerning the mental health or capacity of the applicant. Section 11, which, as I mentioned in my introduction, was originally House Bill 563, is what we call the NICS fix section. Up front, the NICS fix is supposed to be completed by 2019. That's a full 2 years before that pistol permit repeal would be in effect. There's also a provision for a mid-course report to the General Assembly. A few points that I want to make on this is that we've had the opportunity over the last 2 years since we passed House Bill 937 in 2013. We had the opportunity to consult with representatives from NICS, DPS, SBI, as well as AOC on what information we needed to plug the gaps in our NICS reporting. As I mentioned, as many of you already know, we are currently using NICS background checks in the state of North Carolina for our long guns. So we need to plug any missing data that is there, and so we've taken a long 2 years in figuring out what data is there, what data is not there, and how we need to fix it. That section goes through the things that need to be uploaded, how to do so, and the specifics. So it does specify the information to be collected and reported to NICS for those background checks. Requires certain information to be transmitted to NICS by the clerk no later than 48 hours after receiving notice. For the time being, it would require pistol permit applications as well as concealed handgun permit applications to be provided electronically. It prohibits the sheriff from requesting additional information for concealed handgun permit applications unless specifically authorized by statute. It also requires arresting law enforcement agencies to fingerprint persons charged with certain misdemeanors and forward those fingerprints to NICS. Finally, it directs AOC to use court technology funds to comply with the reporting requirements that we're requesting in Section 11. Again, as I mentioned, the pistol permit repeal would occur in 2021. That's a sunset of the system, but that is predicated on that 2018 reporting back to the General Assembly to see how the NICS fixes are going, and then the NICS fix would be completed by 2019. What that does is that it gives the General Assembly ample opportunity, a full 2 years, 2 or 3 years, to see how the NICS fix is working. It would give us time to come back and fix anything that needs to be fixed legislatively, and really just make sure that the system is working properly. Moving on to Section 12. It expands statewide uniformity of firearm regulation to specifically prohibit local governments from adopting regulations that relate to taxation, manufacture, or transportation of firearms. It also allows an individual to bring an action for declaratory and injunctive relief against that local government if they violate that section. Section 13 requires certain state officials that are authorized by federal law to complete certifications that are required by federal law for certain transfer of weapons to complete those certifications within 15 days of request. Section 14, it requires a sheriff to make the request for any records concerning mental health of an applicant for a concealed handgun permit within 15 days of receipt of the permit application. Section 15, this builds on what we did in House Bill 937 2 years ago, and then House Bill 650 2 years prior to that. It allows a person to bring an action for declaratory and injunctive relief against a local government for violation of the statute that prohibits a variety of different types of application of when concealed carry can and cannot be prohibited by the local government. So we really would like to see the uniformity occur that we required in House Bill 937. That is unfortunately not occurring. Section 16, it requires any written questionnaire or form that a health care provider asks a patient to complete that contains questions regarding firearm ownership, etc., to clearly and conspicuously contain or have attached to it a notice that the patient is not required to answer those questions. I want to be very clear that there is no prohibition on oral communications between the doctor and patient on those points. There's no prohibition on written communications. It is simply that the health care provider must provide that disclaimer that the patient is not required to answer those questions. Finally, Section 17, this was requested by our sheriffs. It would authorize a lawful permanent resident of the United States to obtain a North Carolina concealed handgun permit. This was, again, brought to our attention by recent case law that has told us that our current statute is not in conformity with federal law. That is the bill. Not quite in a nutshell, but all 17 sections of it. House Bill 562, it truly is a bill that does make great efforts at balancing these two issues, strengthening our Second Amendment protections as well as really strengthening our background checks. As I said, House Bill 563, that was the point of it. It now appears in House Bill 562. So we are trying to really balance those very important things with each other. As you will have on your desk now, just earlier today, the North Carolina Police Benevolent Association came out in strong support of House Bill 562. I would like to draw your attention to that and hope that you will read that. They do represent the largest association of law enforcement officers. I know that we've been hearing a lot about sheriffs who don't support. There are sheriffs who support it. There are law enforcement officials who support it, and we do have the support of both our law enforcement community as well as our Second Amendment community. And we do put this bill forward and ask for your strong support. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will turn it over to those who may have questions.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Harnett, Representative Lewis, rise?
Send for an amendment.
The gentleman from Harnett recognizes to send forth Amendment ASA 90V1. The clerk will read.
Representative Lewis moves to amend the bill on page 6, line 42 through page 7, lines 24, by deleting those lines.
The gentleman from Harnett has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'll be very brief. Current law requires that if there is the purchase, transfer of a handgun from a private individual to another private individual, that the handgun permit process that is issued by the sheriff be followed. What this amendment would do would say that if there was going to be a transfer of a handgun from one private individual to another, that the sheriff's permit would still be required. It's a very narrowly tailored amendment. I'll be glad to go into great depth, but again, this preserves that the sheriff's permit would still be required for the transfer of a handgun from one private individual to another. I appreciate your support and look forward to some good debate on this bill.
And members, the chair sees several lights. I would ask any members that wish to debate the amendment. Does the lady from Mecklenburg wish to? Okay, for what purpose does the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Schaefer, rise?
To debate the amendment.
The lady has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Lewis, for bringing this amendment forward. I simply wanted to say that I would urge your support on this amendment. Many folks have raised a concern that that we're leaving this area open. I think that this meets that concern, and so I would urge your support on the amendment. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Harnett, Representative Lewis, rise?
May I ask the lady from Mecklenburg a question?
Does the lady from Mecklenburg yield to the gentleman from Harnett?
I yield.
She yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Schaefer. Just to be clear, this amendment would preserve background checks for private transaction of handguns. Is that right?
That is correct.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion, further debate on the amendment. Do either of the members that have lights does the gentleman wish to debate the amendment? For what purpose does the gentleman from Randolph, Representative McNeil, rise?
To ask the amendment sponsor a question.
Does the gentleman from Harnett yield to the gentleman from Randolph?
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
He yields.
Yes, sir. Your amendment says it deletes lines 42 on page 6 through page 7 of line 24, and then replaces them with just section C. Are you deleting sections 10A and 10B and 10C with your amendment?
Representative McNeil, the way this is tailored by staff is to make sure that private transactions are still covered by the sheriff's background checks. It does not address the broader question, for instance, that I think your amendment will get to.
Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Onslow, Representative Cleveland, rise? No. For what purpose does the gentleman from Cabarrus, Representative Pittman, rise?
To debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Several years back now, a friend of mine that I worked with had a pistol that he was wanting to sell, and my son wanted to buy it. And so we got together and went to a local gun dealer, and he did the background check, the NICS check. And that was sufficient. My son already had a pistol permit, but we went ahead and did the NICS check just to be dotting all I's and crossing all T's. And I don't think that the sheriff would have found anything in the permit process that would have, negated what was found in the NICS check. So to me, the NICS check should have been all that we needed. I don't see any reason why the sheriff should have had anything to do with it. It was a legitimate sale. No problem with my son's record that would have kept him from being able to buy it. I don't see why the sheriff had to be involved. So I think requiring a NICS check is sufficient. It's all that we need. And I would not support anything that continues to give the sheriff any say in the matter or that kind of power over what our citizens can do in exercising their Second Amendment rights. So I would urge you to vote no on this amendment.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Gaston, Representative Baumgardner, rise?
To debate the amendment and to ask the amendment sponsor a question.
Does the gentleman wish to propound the question first?
Yes, sir.
Does the gentleman from Harnett yield to the gentleman from Gaston?
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Yields.
Representative Lewis, thank you for bringing this up, but I have a question about this. Do you have any idea, or does anybody have any idea, how many private transactions are conducted between individuals in the state every year, or every week for that matter, where no permit is asked for or given or anything else? People just buy and sell between themselves. Do you have any idea about that?
Representative, I thank you for the question, and I don't.
Can I debate the amendment now?
The gentleman from Gaston has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What bothers me about this amendment is the fact that we are inserting the government in between two private parties conducting a transaction between themselves that is perfectly legal, and the government is inserted. We're inserting the government in between that, and I have a real problem with doing that because there is no way to monitor or anything else how many people are buying and selling guns. We know it happens every day all over the state, all over the country, all over the world for that matter. And we're doing this, but to me it really is an exercise in futility, and I don't think in the long run it'll make any difference.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Cumberland, Representative Lucas, rise?
To speak briefly on the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to commend Representative Lewis for bringing this amendment forth. If we can instill one more safeguard to ensure that our citizens are safe when it comes to firearms, I think it's good. And I think for that reason alone, this is a good amendment. Urge you to support it.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Randolph, Representative McNeil, rise? For what purpose does the gentleman from Guilford, Representative Blust, rise?
See if Representative Schaefer will yield for a question.
Does the lady from Mecklenburg yield to the gentleman from Guilford? Does the lady yield to the gentleman from Guilford?
Yes.
She yields.
Representative Schaefer, what's the current law, or what would be the law under your bill for these type sales private to private? What kind of check, if any, would they get?
Under the bill, what an individual could do is that they could go to a gun dealer and have the gun dealer run the NICS check for them. However, what this would do is that it would require that pistol permit for that private transfer. So under the bill as it is, there still would be the opportunity to have a background check done if an individual went to a gun dealer and asked them to run the NICS check for them on behalf of their transfer.
Follow up, Mr. Speaker.
Does the lady yield to a second question? She yields.
So that would mean it would be voluntary, but it wouldn't be required?
That is correct.
Mr. Speaker, one final question.
Does the lady yield to a final question?
And maybe this would be more directed to Representative Lewis, but if the amendment passes, what's the penalty if someone was selling a gun to another person and did not do a background check? What would they be subjected to?
I do not have that specific information. I do know that we have staff available, and we could find that information out for you if you would like.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, may I direct the question to Representative Lewis?
Does the gentleman from Harnett yield to the gentleman from Guilford?
He yields.
And my question would be, what happens to the seller and the buyer under that transaction if it's required? If your amendment passes, the bill passes, it's required, and then they don't do it?
Representative Blust, I thank you for the question, and I in no way mean to give you a vague answer. There is a current provision in our law that requires the sheriff to do the background check for a individual private seller to an individual private buyer now. There is certainly some penalty if that does not occur. This merely preserves for private individual to private individual the pistol purchase permit, the background check, if you will, and all of the procedures and penalties that currently go along with that.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wake, Representative Pendleton, rise?
To speak on the bill, or the amendment.
The amendment. The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
I'm in favor of this, and the reason I am, right now, the current law, if you sell a pistol, not a firearm, a pistol, which is a form of firearm, that you're required to get a pistol permit from the individual that's buying it. Now, I don't know what the penalty is if you don't, but I could imagine what would happen if that pistol is then used in the commission of a crime, or that person sells it to somebody else and they murder somebody and they find that gun, they're going to come back to the original seller that was logged in when they bought that pistol, and you're going to have a lot of explaining to do. So someone would have to be out of their mind to sell a handgun without a pistol permit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wake, Representative Hall, rise?
To support the bill sponsor on this and the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
With all due respect to some of my colleagues over there, I think Representative Lewis's amendment will make an enormous difference. I'd like to remind some of the members of a few of the things that the pistol purchase permits can do that NICS currently can't do. One is misdemeanor domestic battery records that they wouldn't get through NICS. A couple other ones are fugitive records, probation absconders, because those people haven't been convicted yet. People declared incompetent, involuntary commitments in the system beyond 4 years, misdemeanor drug addicts, and adjudications of mentally incompetent or mentally ill people also wouldn't be picked up with NICS. So I think this amendment could make an extremely big difference.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Buncombe, Representative Turner, rise?
To debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank Representative Lewis for his thoughtful amendment, as well as Representative Schaefer for her willingness to hear it and be supportive of it. Representative Pittman talks about a gun sale between his son and a friend of theirs in a gun shop. and I think that's great. But not all sales happen between parties that know each other, and not all of them happen in a gun shop. Now, I'm a avid supporter of the Second Amendment, a gun owner myself. In fact, I picked up a nice little .22 pistol 2 weeks ago in the parking lot of Home Depot. I went online, got connected with somebody through a group, set up a meeting, showed him my permit, gave him some money, took home a gun. The only way that he knew that I was eligible to purchase that firearm was the permit that I had. Now, I like to think of this, when we look at these private sales, from the perspective of the sellers. If I'm selling a handgun privately to someone I don't know, and I'm not in a gun shop because maybe I don't live in an area where one is around, or maybe I'm conducting my sale at a time when the gun shops are closed, I want to have the confidence that the person I'm selling that gun to is legally eligible to own that gun. I don't want to be responsible for selling the gun to the guy who's got a rap sheet as long as my arm. And my arms are pretty long. I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to protect myself and to protect our community from putting guns in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. I think this is a good amendment. I ask you to support it. And I once again want to thank Representative Lewis and Representative Schaefer for their support of it as well.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Catawba, Representative Adams, rise?
To debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
I stand in opposition to the amendment. My experience with permits to purchase goes back to 1970 in Cabarrus County. I was old enough to buy my first handgun and worked at the service station in downtown Concord. And I was told that I had to walk across the street to the sheriff's office and get a permit to purchase before I could acquire the handgun that I wanted. And I did that. And Sheriff J.B. Roberts issued me a permit to purchase. Went and bought my Browning High Power, which I still have. So a few months later, I'd saved up enough money to buy another handgun. So I went back over to see Sheriff Roberts and asked him for another permit to purchase. And he said, well, you only get one. I said, well, one out how often? And he said, one in your lifetime. So I went back to the service station and was grumbling about the fact that I could only get one pistol permit. One of the customers came in and said, oh, I played football with JB. I'll go get you another permit. And he did. He went across the street and got a permit, brought it back, gave it to me. I went and bought another handgun. Okay, that was probably illegal, but I hope the statute of limitations is out. So a couple of months later, he comes back in the service station, and he is just furious because he decided he wanted a handgun. He went back to JB to get another permit to purchase, and JB gave him the word, only one in your lifetime. He was furious. Is that a possibility today? It genuinely is. But about what the amendment is about, what we're talking about here is using permits between individual transactions. It just is unenforceable. It's been around forever. It just can't be enforced. And nobody knows about it, and nobody does it. I can't imagine how many people have violated this law. I mean, probably a huge fraction of all the pistol transactions that have occurred in the last 50 years have been without a pistol permit. Now, what is being proposed here is making a shift from the pistol permit system to the NICS system over the next 6 years. If the NICS system were available to private transactions, it would be a very simple matter to go to a gun store and say, I would like to sell this person a handgun, but I don't know them. Would you complete the transaction for me? The store owner could then do a NICS check and confidently transfer the gun to the buyer. I stand in opposition to this amendment, and I hope you will join me.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Craven, Representative Speciale, rise? For what purpose does the gentleman from Gaston, Representative Hastings, rise?
To see if Representative Lewis would yield for a question.
Does the gentleman from Harnett yield to the gentleman from Gaston?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
He yields.
and of course this is a friendly question, Representative Lewis, you know that. It's been a long time since I've followed these gun laws, really since my freshman year when I was a primary sponsor of House Bill 650 and the Castle Doctrine. But I'm trying to square this in my own mind, and you're testing me mentally here. This would have to do with transactions. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
This would not cover a gift or an inheritance. Is that correct?
Representative Hastings, you may want to direct that to someone a little more knowledgeable than I, but I would point out that what the consideration is, if it's zero, if it's a gift, it's still a transaction if I transfer one thing, if I transfer something to you, for instance.
Follow up?
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Does the gentleman yield to a second question? He yields.
Well, I don't want to get into contract law and consideration and offer acceptance and all that, but so let's remove that and let's just talk about the inheritance situation. This would not cover a situation where a person inherited a firearm?
Representative, to be totally candid with you, I don't know. I don't know what the administrator of the estate would require before they would convey a handgun that was left in a will.
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
To debate.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
I try to respect the member's time, but this is a serious issue, so I want to take just a couple of minutes to make sure that I speak orally to the public regarding what I'm thinking. Under the current scenario, it's my understanding that a person can go purchase a rifle or a shotgun without a permit from the sheriff. At least when I bought my daughter's little Davy Cricket rifle, I didn't have to have a permit. They ran a background check there on the spot. So my point is, there are already overarching state and federal laws that would make the possession of a firearm legal or illegal. This would simply be another law. It's already illegal in numerous circumstances to have that firearm, whether a background check is done or not. So I'm leaning toward not supporting the amendment for those reasons, but I just wanted to share those ideas before I cast my vote.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Catawba, Representative Adams, rise?
To debate the amendment a second time.
The gentleman is recognized to debate the amendment a second time.
The discussion at hand is covered under General Statute 14-404. And I'll read this. It says, it's unlawful for any person, firm, or corporation in this state to sell, give away, or transfer, or to purchase or receive at any place within this state from any other place within or without the state any pistol unless a license or permit is first obtained under this article by the purchaser or receiver from the sheriff of the county in which the purchaser or receiver resides, or 2, a valid North Carolina concealed carry handgun permit is held under Article 54B of this chapter by the purchaser or receiver who must be a resident of the state at the time of purchase. Yes, indeed, this does cover inheritances, any transfer. Now, as I mentioned earlier, can you imagine how difficult this would be to try to track? That is one of the fundamental failures of the pistol permit system. The NICS system would be able to cure this fairly easily in a straightforward manner.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pender, Representative Millis, rise?
Ask the amendment sponsor a question.
Does the gentleman from Harnett yield to the gentleman from Pender?
Yes,
he yields.
Representative Lewis, in regard to the current wording of this amendment, a lot of the objections that I hear definitely ring true with me, and as the amendment is currently authored, I can't support it. My question to you is that would you be willing to offer an amendment that would actually have this type of transfer by way of private individuals be handled by way of a NICS check that the individual, just as Representative Pittman articulated and shared, where before an individual would sell or receive a pistol, that they can go to a federally licensed firearm dealer, get a NICS check, have that in their possession. So if the instance that Representative Pendleton described, if the firearm would be actually used in a crime, that as the hierarchy goes for law enforcement, that you could show that you have the NICS check, and therefore that we move away from a flawed and obsolete pistol purchase permit. Would you be amenable to actually alter this amendment to include the NICS instead of the pistol permit purchase through the sheriff's office?
Well, Representative, I appreciate the question. I thought a lot about that, and I don't know how we would require a private business that would be a federally licensed firearm dealers to perform a NICS check if they weren't actually making the sale. And so I felt like the current system, which provides for background checks via the sheriff's office, was the way that we could continue to guarantee that that background checks would remain in place. To directly answer your question, I'd prefer to not add that to this amendment, but I'd certainly be willing to consider it on an additional amendment, perhaps on third.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Union, Representative Brody, rise?
To ask Representative Turner a question, if you wouldn't mind.
Does the Turner of Buncombe or Turner of Iredell?
Turner of Buncombe.
Does the gentleman yield to the gentleman from Union?
Absolutely.
Yields.
Thank you, Representative Turner. Just a real quick, I guess a basic question. You had mentioned in your story that you had a permit. Now imagine if you also had a copy machine. Could you tell me how many copies that machine may limit if you started copying that permit and handing it out to other folks?
I think the representative brings up an interesting question here, and I think it drives the concern of, is the permit purchase process perfect? You can say that several times real fast. No, it's not. But is it a good deterrent? Is it an imperfect tool that's working in some respects to prevent people who shouldn't have guns having guns? Absolutely. So I say, why don't we, adjust and amend the current process to make it better versus just throwing it out altogether? Because when we start to be in a world where people can just willy-nilly buy and sell, trade, give handguns to one another without knowing if that person is under a protection order, if they're a violent criminal, I think I'm getting a little concerned now. So, the process isn't perfect, but let's fix it, not throw it away.
The gentleman from Harnett, Representative Lewis, is recognized to send forth a perfecting amendment. The clerk will read. Actually, Representative Lewis, the amendment can be addressed, since it's merely typographical, it can be initialed, and a perfecting amendment will not be necessary. Members will refer to the amendment that's on the dashboard. It's been refreshed. There was just a line wrong. It was a simple or just a drafting error. It was not substantive. That has been changed on the amendment before the body. For what purpose does the gentleman from Guilford, Representative Luster, rise?
See if Representative Jordan will yield for a question.
Does the gentleman from Ash yield to the gentleman from Guilford? He doesn't have to.
I do, with curiosity.
Well, Representative Jordan, you've said before in debates on various things that you practice in the area of trusts and estates and inheritances, and since this applies to inheritance, a handgun that might be inherited, I was wondering if you could explain how that might work. Suppose A dies and leaves in his will or by intestacy gun to B, background check is conducted, B doesn't pass, what then happens?
Well, Representative, thank you for the question. In my opinion, it would be depending on what the will said. The item would go back to the estate, and the executor would either have discretion to do something else with the item, or sell it and distribute the funds to the remaining heirs, or sell it and give the money to the heir that no longer was eligible to receive a firearm so they could have the money that it's worth.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Nash, Representative Collins, rise?
Briefly debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
My good friend and teammate, Representative Hall, teammate on the basketball floor at least, brought out some of the things that the NICS instant background checkup does not pick up. I'd like to point out, too, that the pistol permit also has some glaring holes in it. The biggest one being the fact that I could go out this afternoon, well, probably not this afternoon because I won't have time. I could go out tomorrow to my sheriff and pick up a pistol permit and then come back next week and my seatmate infuriate me by trying to pass another liquor bill, I guess, and I commit assault and battery on him in front of all you witnesses, beat him half to death, and wind up going to jail and serve with time allowed in jail before the trial and after 4 years and 11 months and 3 weeks, and get out of jail, get out of prison after that 4 years and 11 months and 3 weeks, and then go into the Walmart parking lot in my city, as Representative Turner described. And guess what? I've got a legitimate pistol permit and could buy a pistol off anybody, and he think, yeah, this guy's legitimate to have it. He's got his pistol permit. Once that thing is issued, it's good for 5 years, and nobody knows what that person has done in the last 4 years and 364 days. So don't think the system is a fail-safe system for making sure you're selling a handgun to a person who's safe to own it. It certainly is not. I would much personally, if I'm going to sell a handgun to somebody, I would much rather have an instant background check that brings me up to date. It may leave out a few crimes that they could have committed, but if they've committed assault and battery on somebody, or if they've shot at somebody or done anything else like that in the last 5 years, I'm going to know about it through that NICS system. So I can't support this amendment for that reason.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Craven, Representative Speciale, rise?
Speak on the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Yeah, I've heard it said, well, it's not a perfect system, the pistol permits. It's not even close to perfect. It's not even close to adequate. It's not even close to working. It's a useless system. It's a Jim Crow remnant that we need to get rid of. You just heard someone tell you, if you get your permit, 2 weeks later you get in trouble, you violate the law, you commit a felony, you go to prison for 2 years, you get out of prison, you still have your permit. There's nothing the sheriff can do. He can't pull your permit. No, he can't. I see our former sheriff saying yes he can, and I'm saying no he can't, at least according to my sheriff. There's nothing in the law that allows him to go and take that permit from you. Even if there was, I asked my sheriff, I said, well, wait a minute. I said, I've got a concealed carry permit, which allows me for 5 years that permit is good to go and buy guns without having to get the gun permit. And he said, you're right. And I know I'm right because I bought him on it. I said, but when I go in there, all they do is take the information. They don't do a NICS check. They don't do anything. He said, you're right. I said, well, I said, well, am I missing something here? I could go to jail for 2 years, get out, and I've still got my concealed carry. He said, no. He said, we've gotten pretty good around the state at revoking those permits. I said, really? I said, when you come to me and you say, hey, Mike, we need that permit back. And I say, oh, you know, I lost that thing 6 months ago. You know what his response was? You're right, nothing we can do about it. I said, but I still have it. And then I can go in and I can buy a gun because they're not going to do a NICS check. They're not going to do anything but write down the information on the permit. My point is, for 5 years, these permits are good. It serves no purpose. The permit serves no purpose. They check you when you first get it. They run the NICS check. But when you walk away for the next 5 years that you have that permit, if you hold on to it, no matter what you do, you can still go in and buy a gun with it. We're hanging our hat on a system that is antiquated, that does not work. We're putting our faith in a system. Felons have permits. Felons are buying guns. You don't have to take my word on it. Just go back in the newspapers for Charlotte, and they wrote an article on it a couple of years ago about how many active felons at that time, and I'm sure most of you got this in your email, how many active felons they had. It was several hundred of them that had these permits. The permit system is useless. It was a Jim Crow system designed to keep certain people from getting guns. Why? Because the sheriff could use the phrase of good moral character and say, nope, not going to get that permit. Who is the sheriff to determine if I've got good moral character? This is ridiculous. I'm tired of hearing about the sheriffs. Well, the sheriffs know more about it than... No, they don't. This isn't Mayberry. They don't know who all the people are. They don't know you. They don't know me. I mean, we may know them because we're politically connected, but the point here is they don't know the people. They don't have any hidden information on the people that everyone else wouldn't have. When they go into the NICS, they run the NICS check, they run whatever couple of checks they think they're going to run, and that's the end of it. We need to get rid of this permit system altogether. We need to dump it. Stop putting your faith in something that's a useless system that is not accomplishing what you want it to accomplish.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wake, Representative Hall, rise?
I speak to the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Colleagues, what they're talking about is something called the felony loophole, and it's something we could fix very easily. One answer to this is we could change the amount of years. We could change it from 5 to 4, 3, 2, 1. But the better answer, I think, is to also require a NICS check, say after 1 year. One of my colleagues talked about it not having a purpose. It has an enormous purpose. We need this initial check for domestic battery, for drug addiction, for the mentally ill. I hope you'll vote with the amendment sponsor and with the bill sponsor.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Gaston, Representative Hastings, rise?
Mr. Speaker, would it be in order to ask Representative Schaefer a question?
Does the lady from Mecklenburg yield to the gentleman from Gaston?
I yield.
She yields.
Representative Schaefer, I'm sorry to take this time, but I want to get this right. And whether I'm involved in a commercial transaction, a gift, or an inheritance, but primarily a commercial transaction, if I go buy a rifle or a shotgun tomorrow, do I have to have a permit from the sheriff?
I believe that you do not have to have a permit from the sheriff. You would have to have one, however, for a handgun, as they are set apart separately in law.
Follow up.
Does the lady yield to a second question? She yields.
Final question. Regardless of how a person has a firearm or a rifle or a shotgun, aren't there overarching federal and state laws already in place that dictate the legal ownership of a firearm, rifle, or shotgun?
I'm not certain that I understand your question. Could you restate your question?
Are there overarching federal laws in place that make the ownership of a firearm legal or illegal?
Yes, that is correct.
Follow up.
Does the lady yield to an additional question?
Yes.
She yields.
So whether I get a permit or not, if I'm not legally authorized to have possession of a firearm, that would be against the law.
That would be correct.
Thank you, Representative Schaefer.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Craven, Representative Speciale, rise?
To speak on the amendment one more time.
The gentleman is recognized to debate the amendment a second time.
I just want to address our colleagues' comments about that we could change the permit system and we can shorten the time frame. If we shorten the time frame, that's not going to do anything. I can get in trouble 6 months after I have it, and 3 months later get out of jail, and I still got my permit. So no matter how much you shorten it, it's not going to do it. And you say, well, we can run the NICS check after a year. I agree with that. How about we just do away with the permit and run the NICS check every time you go get a gun?
The question before the House is the adoption of Amendment 1 sent forth by Representative Lewis. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. Representative Ager wish to report on this vote? The clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. 87 having voted in the affirmative and 29 in the negative, the amendment is adopted. The gentleman from Catawba, Representative Adams, is recognized to send forth Amendment ASA 73 V6. The clerk will read.
Representative Adams moves to amend the bill on page 8, lines 32 through 33 by inserting the following between those lines.
The gentleman from Catawba has the floor to debate the amendment.
As you've heard already, there are a number of problems with the pistol purchase permit. This has been around since 1959. One of the things you would expect for practice being enforced for so long is it would evolve and improve over time, but that has not been the case with pistol purchase permits. Right now, a pistol purchase permit originates from a laser printer, and it's filled out by the sheriff and issued to the individual. It's only one step away from all the pistol permits you want, and that would be a laser scanner. And that's just the reality we deal with. I hate to debate this on the floor because this has not been a problem in the past. What I'm offering here is a partial solution. What I am proposing is that we go from, and let me give you one moment background. A couple of weeks ago, I went to my local gun shop and I said, I'd like to look at some pistol permits. I want to see what they look like. And he told me, he said, well, I don't have too many because about 80% of my handgun transactions are now done with concealed carry licenses. But we looked through some stuff and we found one from Catawba County and one from Alexander County. They were entirely different. The one from Catawba County was a nice looking formal permit with a seal, embossed seal on it. The one from Alexander County had a stamped seal on it, very different looking permit. And it occurred to me, I did not know this. I've been messing around with guns for 50 years, but I did not realize this, that there are 100 counties, there are 100 sheriffs, there is a variety of software packages that sheriff's offices use. There is potentially 100 different permits in North Carolina. And how can a gun shop in Wilmington recognize the validity of a pistol permit issued in Catawba County? It's not possible. It just isn't possible. And how can you tell if something has been counterfeited that is so simple to replicate as one of these pistol permits? So I'm offering what I hope will lead us in the right direction, lead us out of the woods, so to speak. What I'm suggesting is we create a standard form permit issued by the state, created by the State Bureau of Investigation, of a uniform size and material that will contain a watermark and be designated and designed to minimize the ability to counterfeit or replicate the permit. And it would contain the language that's prescribed by law today. The standard permit created by this section would be used statewide by the sheriffs of all counties, and when issued by a sheriff, would also contain a embossed seal unique to the office of the issuing sheriff. Section 10F, permits issued pursuant to Article 52A of Chapter 14 of the General Statutes prior to the effective date of subsection E of this section shall remain valid. The permits that are in force that have been issued would remain valid until expiration. Any person possessing a valid permit issued prior to the effective date of the subsection of this section may exchange the permit for an updated permit from the sheriff that issued the original permit with no further application required. I would further elaborate, it's not in the amendment, but I would update this to say that there would be a sunset on the old permits so that it would have to be turned in for a new standard issue permit. Department of Public Safety shall make reasonable efforts to notify federally licensed firearm dealers in the state of the new permit appearance and requirements implemented by subsection E of this section. So what we're doing here is we're creating a standardized permit that would be recognized in any gun shop anywhere in the state. It would just simply have a different sheriff's seal on each of the permits. They could be serialized. It would make it much easier for sheriffs to retrieve the permits in the event that they find that one of the people that applied for it and was issued a permit was committed a crime. I hope you'll support the amendment. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Randolph, Representative McNeil, rise?
To speak on the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
And Representative Adams and I have talked about this particular situation for some time now. I have a brother that is a federal firearms dealer and runs a gun shop in Asheboro. And I've talked to him about this, and he says that it is sometimes difficult when someone comes in with a permit from another county to determine whether it's a legitimate permit or not. It's difficult for me to say whether I'm for his amendment or not, because I have a similar amendment that is part of a larger amendment that I'm going to run later, which basically does the same thing as his, except I think where his says the SBI, mine says the Department of Public Safety. I know that there are so many amendments here now that probably it's going to take till tomorrow to figure out how many of them overlap. I won't oppose his amendment because I have an amendment to do basically the same thing. I guess if his passes and mine passes, we'll just have to work out the difference in the language at some point later, but they are going to overlap.
For what purpose does the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Schaefer, rise?
To debate the amendment.
The lady has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very briefly, I want to add to the comments of Representative Adams and Representative McNeil, but I would like to ask for the members to support the amendment. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Cumberland, Representative Floyd, rise?
To see if Representative Dollar will yield for a question.
Which member?
Representative Dollar.
Representative Dollar, does the gentleman yield to the gentleman from Cumberland?
I yield.
He yields.
Representative Dollar, does this require a physical note?
It's a determination of the Appropriations Committee that it does not require a physical note on this amendment.
Thank you.
Further discussion, further debate on the amendment? If not, the question before the House is the adoption of Amendment 2 offered by Representative Adams. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. The clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. 112 having voted in the affirmative and 3 in the negative, the amendment is adopted. The gentleman from Onslow, Representative Cleveland, is recognized to send forth an amendment ASA 81V3. The clerk will read.
Representative Cleveland moves to amend the bill on page 5, lines 43 through 44 by rewriting that line to read.
The gentleman from Onslow has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we can move this amendment along with a little bit of speed. It is a technical amendment. It was some changes and clarification, some changes to statute and clarification in some language requested by the Administrative Office of the Court. I hope you support the amendment.
Further discussion, further debate. If not, the question before the House is the passage of Amendment 3 offered by Representative Cleveland. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. The clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. 115 having voted in the affirmative and none in the negative. The amendment is adopted. The lady from Iredell, Representative Turner, is recognized to send forth Amendment ASA 58. Clerk will read.
Representative Turner moves to amend the bill on page 5, lines 32 through 48 by rewriting those lines to read.
The lady from Iredell has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Section 7 of this bill would make change to the current law prohibiting concealed carry permits after committing certain misdemeanor offenses from a lifetime ban to a 3 or 5 year ban. There are some violations that are severe enough to warrant keeping the current ban in place. These violations have direct consequences for domestic violence victims and their families, including assault and battery inflicting serious injury, assault on a female, stalking, child abuse, and violation of a domestic violence protective order. All these misdemeanors mentioned are forms of domestic violence that perpetrators use or are charged with in North Carolina because there's no statutory domestic violence offense. Domestic violence is usually chronic and forces victims to live in fear of abuse or death for themselves and their families. In order to be charged with a stalking offense in North Carolina, perpetrators must have demonstrated a course of conduct that harasses someone to the point of being fearful for their life. The statute clearly states that the General Assembly encourages effective intervention by a criminal justice system before stalking escalates into behavior that has serious or lethal consequences. A 5-year prohibition on concealed carry for perpetrators is simply not enough to provide safety and security for the victim and their family. They need more security in these situations. Your support of this amendment would help to protect your most vulnerable constituents and their families. This allows for domestic violence perpetrators to be denied access to a concealed deadly weapon and denied the chance to take the lives of people who need the state's protection. I ask for your support. We have removed from the original language of this amendment the simple assault language, which will revert back to the 3 or 5 year period, whichever was appropriate, and also communicating threats. So I hope that will allay some of the concerns we had. Thank you for your support.
For what purpose does the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Schaefer, rise?
To debate the amendment.
The lady has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Turner, for bringing this amendment. And we have had a lot of conversations over the last 2 weeks about this particular provision, and still going through it. And I know you're not going to be happy with this, but I'm actually going to oppose the amendment. I believe that what we have in the language of the bill already takes care of the issues that are being raised. And I would draw your attention to page 5, line 49. It's still in accordance with federal law, frankly. It does not change the misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence. I want to underscore these are misdemeanor offenses. Any of the felony offenses that relate to stalking or domestic violence or anything, they're not affected. This is just for misdemeanors. But we haven't touched the misdemeanor convictions for domestic violence, and we have allowed that to stand as a permanent bar, and believe that does give that protection. So I have given this a lot of thought, as Representative Turner has as well, and I would ask for members to oppose the amendment.
Members, the chair is going to temporarily displace this amendment. Representative McNeil is recognized to send forth Amendment ASA 85. The clerk will read.
Representative McNeil moves to amend the bill on page 6, line 42 through page 7, line 24 by deleting those lines.
The gentleman from Randolph is recognized to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and House members. My bill does something very, very simple. This House bill basically repeals the sheriff's permit system in North Carolina in 6 years. Okay. Now, currently in the bill, there are 3 things that the Sheriff's Association and offered to the bill sponsors that they incorporated into the bill. Okay. Those 3 things are still preserved in my amendment. So let me talk about them just briefly. Number 1, my amendment rewrites sections 10A and B and C of House Bill 562, which have the effect of leaving the sheriff's pistol permit system intact as it currently is in our statute. And it leaves in the language, that some language that is already in the bill, which I will explain to you, and I add one new section. So, follow me as I go through it. All right. Current law allows sheriffs to make decisions on granting a permit based on an assessment of good moral character. Nothing in current law limits the look-back period for this assessment. This amendment would limit the sheriff's ability to evaluate the good moral character, would limit it to a 5-year period. Also, to ensure consistency across counties, there would be a uniform permit process created to be used by all sheriffs statewide, developed in coordination between the Department of Public Safety and the Sheriff's Association. In addition, the application would be available to all applicants electronically. The only things that this could be asked for now would be a standard permit application, the $5 fee, a government-issued ID to prove identity, a signed release for the mental health records. The bill also, the amendment also states that the sheriff shall require no further document or evidence. It improves the timeliness of issuing permits. The amendment requires those who possess mental health records to respond promptly to requests for information made by the sheriff for the purposes of completing the permit review. And this amendment would also require a standard permit that would be issued by all 100 sheriffs, which would have a raised seal on it, thus reducing the chance of forgery of their permit. This last section was part of my amendment, which is also similar to the amendment that Representative Adams offered just a few minutes ago. I think this amendment strikes a balance between those wanting to get rid of the pistol permit system and those who want to keep it and improve it. This amendment will improve the process, making it consistent across the state. It fixes some of the top concerns raised by critics of the current permit process. I want to stress that this amendment keeps the sheriff's pistol permit law in place and makes improvements that I mentioned. And, Mr. Speaker, I stand ready if there's any questions.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Hanover, Representative Davis, rise?
Speak on the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I've talked with my local sheriff about this amendment, and he favors keeping the existing sheriff background check in place. I agree with that. I think it is something that we need to continue having. I think it's very important that we support this amendment, and I would ask you to please vote green. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Catawba, Representative Adams, rise?
To turn off my cell phone, to debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Actually, ask a question of the bill sponsors. Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker? Okay.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
I want to change it to a question to the bill sponsors.
Does the gentleman wish to ask the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Schaefer,
yes.
a question? Does the lady from Mecklenburg yield to the gentleman from Catawba?
I yield.
She yields.
Just a point of clarification for the body. First part of this amendment repeals the repeal of the pistol permit system. That's already occurred, in my understanding, by the amendment offered by Representative Lewis earlier. Am I correct?
Representative Adams, I believe that is correct. I was just conferring with my fellow bill sponsors on the nature of what Representative Lewis's former amendment does now in view of this, or vice versa, what Representative McNeil's amendment would do in view of that. I do believe that there may be a conflict, in fact, because he's not amending the current language in the current bill.
Mr. Speaker?
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
To debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
If the pistol permit system has been repealed by the earlier amendment, it has not. Okay. In that case, I stand in opposition to this amendment, but I like the language you came up with. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wake, Representative Pickleton, rise?
To speak on the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
I rise in favor of this amendment, and my reason for it is most of my pistols I bought prior to 1995 when concealed weapons permit came in, and you had to go down to the sheriff's department and get them. And my reason for it is that I believe it will help keep some people from committing a crime. And I'm going to use an example. Tom gets fired from his business one Tuesday afternoon about 3 o'clock, and he goes down to a gun dealer that's open, say Dick's Sporting Goods, it's open to 10 o'clock, and he buys a gun. Well, let's just move the time up further. Anyway, he goes down after he gets fired, he buys a pistol, he goes through the main gate, he's got his pistol concealed under his coat, he goes in, kills his boss and 5 other people. If he had to go get a sheriff's permit to buy that, then he would have to go down to the sheriff's department. So he's got time to think, is he really going to go down to the sheriff's department, or maybe he's going to wise up and not do it? So I believe it could keep people from doing some mass murders by having to go to the trouble to get a permit. In Wake County, it takes about a week to get a pistol permit. So that gives you a lot of cooling off time. So I speak in favor of that.
For what purpose does the lady from Guilford, Representative Harrison, rise?
To debate the amendment.
Lady has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I want to speak in support of Representative McNeil's amendment. Pistol permitting is very important for preventing gun violence. You've all probably seen the statistic, but when Missouri repealed its pistol permitting, gun-related deaths went up by 25%. And I understand that when Connecticut reinstated pistol permitting, the gun-related violence went down by 40%. The proof is there. This is a very important program. I urge you to support Representative McNeil's amendment. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Cabarrus, Representative Pittman, rise?
I guess first I need to inquire the chair.
The gentleman may state his inquiry.
Before I make the comments that I was planning to make, I need to be clear, sir. Has the pistol purchase permit repeal been already affected by Representative Lewis's amendment? I mean, has that already been removed from the bill by his amendment?
The House will stand at ease while the chair reviews it.
There's no need of making them if it's been repealed. I mean, if that's been removed from the bill.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Just a moment, Representative Floyd. Let me respond to the gentleman's parliamentary inquiry, then I'll come back to the member. Representative Pittman, just in conferring with staff, and I think the question's well-founded, as we have a number of amendments, some of them will overlap. The amendment is still in order at this time to proceed. The amendment that the House passed that Representative Lewis sent forth just modified it as to private, I guess, one-on-one sales, spelled that out. And so this amendment, should it pass, I guess actually trumps that in some way, and then there may have to be some conforming language adopted of a technical nature later, but this amendment proposed by Representative McNeil would in fact trump the other amendment.
So to follow up,
the gentleman may state his further.
So that means right now we still have the repeal in the bill.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir. Then I'd like to comment on the amendment.
Okay. Just let me see in case there was a parliamentary inquiry if the gentleman will stand aside. For what purpose did the gentleman from Cumberland, Representative Floyd, rise?
Inquiry with the chair.
The gentleman may state his inquiry.
And this can be also to the rude person. This is a 2-day bill. Then if there's any changes that can be made, those changes can be made tomorrow or the second day. It's what you just mentioned.
It's not a roll call bill, which means we could do second and third today, but based upon the amount of robust debate we've had just on amendments, the chair would anticipate that there will probably be an objection to third. So there would be certainly some amendments and things that need to be worked out of a technical nature could be done tomorrow. I think that's where the gentleman is going.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay. Now, the gentleman from Cabarrus, Representative Pittman, has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to oppose any amendment that would remove the repeal language from this bill. The pistol purchase permit requirement allows a sheriff the power of control over our citizens that is clearly in violation of the Second Amendment and the first portion of Article 1, Section 30 of our own state constitution. The Second Amendment clearly says shall not be infringed. It doesn't say shall not be infringed except in some enumerated bunch of circumstances. Simply says shall not be infringed. And requiring a permit is an infringement, and we need to do away with it. Why would free people tolerate that infringement of one of the most basic rights of American citizens? Why would we want to prop up a system that is not as effective as the NICS check system, which can be improved as required in this bill, and which is actually the only background check done by some of our sheriffs in the first place? Why would we want to continue a clearly unconstitutional system and a Jim Crow law at that rate, which is so inefficient that it allows criminals to get guns legally while hampering the efforts of law-abiding citizens to exercise a right guaranteed by the Second Amendment? Why, for instance, would we want to leave a battered and threatened woman at the mercy of her potential assailant while she waits for a sheriff to decide if she can exercise the right of self-defense? The only reason to keep this inefficient, unconstitutional, and costly system in place is for the purpose of allowing too much power to one person in each county to exercise unwarranted and unjust control over a basic right of our citizens. I ask you not to do that. Please, let's do away with the pistol purchase permit requirement by passing this bill with the repeal of that requirement in it. I'd rather that repeal would be immediate and not take 6 years to do it, as the bill currently says. But I've agreed to that compromise, as distasteful as it is. And I ask you simply to honor the compromise that is in the bill. We ought never to have had a requirement for pistol purchase permits. And the NICS system, though it can be improved, is enough. And so, please, let's repeal this unjust and unconstitutional requirement. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Stanley, Representative Burr, rise?
Speak on the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to oppose the amendment respectfully. I think that what we have currently in the bill is just a matter of us taking the steps we need to as a state to catch up with the times, to catch up with technology. That's what we're talking about here. It's the difference in using a piece of paper to have a permit versus having an instantaneous background check on a computer versus being able to call. For those of you who live near other bordering states, by having that type of background where you're using NICS, if someone's committed a crime in South Carolina, but they live here in North Carolina and they come back across the border, the likelihood of catching them, preventing them from receiving a handgun, is increased. They will hopefully be able to prevent those folks from having guns. It increases that. It is catching North Carolina up with today's world, the technology. You know, the NICS system has been around since it was first established in 1993 by the Brady handgun law. I mean, this is something that was initiated and signed into law, I believe, by President Clinton and by a Democratic Congress. You know, this is something they set up and established, and it's actually something that we can use here in North Carolina to help make sure that we are doing everything we can to keep guns out of the hands of individuals who should not have them. That's what this is doing. It's catching us up with the times. It's making sure that we can move forward and prevent people who commit a crime, whether it was 5 years ago or yesterday, that increases the likelihood that we catch them. So I would ask that you vote against this amendment, leave the repeal in place, and allow North Carolina to have an instantaneous background check when someone goes to a dealership, to a dealer to purchase a handgun, which is identical to what happens now for long guns. I know it was mentioned about someone getting angry and going and being able to purchase a gun immediately. Well, they can already do that. They can already go out and purchase long guns in this state. And I've not heard of situations such as that coming about as a result of someone going out and immediately purchasing a gun like that in North Carolina. So, you know, we can come up with all types of hypothetical, you know, horrible scenarios, but at the end of the day, this is about making sure that we're not putting a burden on individuals in the state, law-abiding individuals in the state, to have their right and use their right to protect themselves and their families and to purchase a handgun. So I would ask you oppose this amendment.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rutherford, Representative Hager, rise?
Debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I believe in the first role of government is to protect its citizens. I think that we have to be very diligent every day to protect the almost 10 million people and citizens of North Carolina. But the second thing I believe in is, what does the data tell us? What does the data tell us we're doing? What does it tell us we need to do? What does it tell us we need to do to move forward? So as I looked and started gathering data for this, I think Representative Burr showed me that 32 other states use the NICS system alone. That's all they do. They don't have the sheriff issue, the step we have in there. So I got to wondering, well, obviously if we're doing an extra step, then our gun deaths per, say, 100,000 ought to be significantly lower because we have this extra step in there. Comes to find out, of the 32 states we have, about 17 of them have gun deaths worse than ours. About 15 of them have gun deaths better than ours. So it tells me we're right in the middle. So I'm not sure what this step does. I'm not sure it produces anything other than having to wait, other than to put our folks in another step to do that. So when I look at the data, when I look at what I know our job is, our number one job here in the legislature is to protect our citizens, and then I look at the data, and the data tells me that this step doesn't appear to do anything, I would say let's eliminate this step. So I'd ask you to vote no on the amendment.
For what purpose does the lady from Carteret, Representative McElrath, rise?
To ask a question of the bill sponsor.
Does the lady from Mecklenburg yield to the lady from Carteret?
I yield.
She yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Schaefer. I have a question about if a person has committed several domestic violence offenses. The sheriff charges them, but the woman then comes in and says, I will not testify against my husband, and so the sheriff has to then drop the charges. That happens a lot in our county. And I'm wondering if the NICS system would pick up something like that.
Thank you for the question, Representative McElrath. Under Section 11 of the bill, the NICS fix that we are requiring would catch that. It is requiring domestic violence arrests related to domestic violence, to be reported. So yes, and we have contemplated that is very, very important. So yes, it would catch that.
Follow up, Mr. Speaker.
Does the lady yield to an additional question? She yields.
So even with just an arrest but no conviction, it will be reported.
That is correct.
Thank you very much.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Union, Representative Brody, rise?
To ask the amendment sponsor a question, please.
Does the gentleman from Randolph yield to the gentleman from Union? He yields.
I do. Thank you, Representative McNeil. Question that I kind of took off from when I asked Representative Turner the same thing. You and your experience have probably dealt with forgeries whether it's a driver's license or some other document. We do experience a lot of forgeries in money, forgeries all over the place. Would you agree that if a clever criminal really wants to get a gun, they could take a document, whatever you do, put together, and still forge it and get away and buy a gun and of course recopy that forger on a copy machine and just continue to buy guns? Is that actually possible, that we can forge these documents?
Well, I would say as long as currency has been around, and with all the expense that the federal government has put into trying to stop counterfeit currency, that yes, anybody in the technology age that we live in could counterfeit anything. My amendment, as Representative Adams' amendment did, actually inserts language into the law which basically says that the permit that is issued once a person goes through the process and they go and they pick up their permit, it would be a standard permit on sheriff's letterhead. It would have a raised seal on it. Now, could that be counterfeited? It's difficult to counterfeit a raised seal, but not impossible. I assume that someone could get a raised seal that had similar. So to answer your question, in this day, it's possible, but I think it would be less likely given the amendment that's part of this, or part of my amendment.
Follow up, Mr. Speaker.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do. Which would you figure would be less likely to be? Which would you figure less likely to be forged? A document from a sheriff, or the ability for somebody to tap into the NICS system and adjust certain data?
Which could be forged?
No, which would be less likely to be forged? Point being, if I may, that we have the ability to forge documents. I mean, we know this. Everybody knows this. But the NICS system, would you agree that it doesn't provide a person the ability to go into it and change their particular information to get around a crime, for example, that they might have committed?
I would hope that the NICS system does not have a back door to it so that a person could go into it and change their identification or their criminal background or something like that too. But I would also hope that the IRS wouldn't have been hacked and lost millions of taxpayers' records too. So to answer your question again, could a very smart person that is great at hacking get into the NICS system? I would say if they could get into the IRS, they could get into the NICS system. But I know where you're headed with that, and so.
Representative Fraley is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, when I first started looking at this bill, and the amendment and the bill, I was basing my opinion on maintaining the sheriff's permits based on a long dialogue with my local sheriff and law enforcement people in the area. This convinced me that these are the people on the line every day, and if their belief was this was the best way to make the community safer and law enforcement better and safer, then I was going to stick with them on supporting Representative McNeil's amendment. A few weeks ago, when this also came to the forefront, I happened to start receiving lots of calls and lots of emails, as many of you did and a few of my other colleagues. And I started calling some of these people back, or answering the phone when they called. And they started jumping up and down, and I said, "Excuse me, would you please give me 90 seconds to explain why I think the permit should remain with the sheriff. The vast, vast majority of those people immediately said, oh, that's what we want too. Therefore, I maintain my position and I urge you to support this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Faircloth is recognized.
To debate the amendment.
You're recognized.
I know all of us in here realize the tradition of the sheriff and the government of North Carolina, in fact the government of our nation. It's an old office, been around a long time. A lot of those sheriffs that are still in office have seen a lot of things happen. Have all the sheriffs we've had over the years been honorable characters? No, I had the responsibility of doing the first certification of sheriff's departments back in the 70s when we began to have the state sort of get its arm around law enforcement in order to standardize issues. And looking back at the history of any office, be it governor, president, sheriff, magistrate, whatever, there are a few scoundrels there. But most of the sheriffs that I've dealt with over the years are honorable folks who just want to do a good job in their community. And I've been a little bit bothered by some of the rhetoric that has been thrown at our sheriffs in general recently. You know, if you know a bad guy, then go after the bad guy. But don't pick a class of people, as we're so prone to do, and attack them. Our sheriffs, for the great percentage of cases, are very dependable. Have they had a system that was a perfect system? Absolutely not. Things we're talking about now should have been done years ago. We should have standardized things years ago. We didn't do it, so we've allowed ourselves to get into this malaise that we have now, trying to find all these answers that we're arguing hours about. And we still have not found the answer. But we did find one thing. Let's have a federal program that we all send our information, our personal information about us, to Washington or wherever it goes in NICS, so they'll know everybody that has bought a gun in North Carolina, and the federal government will be controlling that. That makes me feel comfortable. I do not oppose this bill. We need to have the bill passed, even if it has a few burrs on it. I didn't mean that, Representative Burr. I didn't mean it that way. Even if it has a few wrinkles, let's say it that way. That's more like me. So I am going to support the bill, but I'm also going to support this amendment. Here's a gentleman, Chief Deputy McNeil, who knows the sheriff's operation. He's been around a long time. He knows how these things work. He knows that it's not a perfect system, but he also knows if we work together, we can evolve from where we are now with all the problems it has to what we all want it to be in the future without making some mistakes along the way that we may very well regret. And some of the suggestions I've seen in some of these proposals, we would regret them when the time comes. I do urge you to support his amendment and let us work our way to what we want things to be 5 or 6 years down the road, and do it in the right way. Thank you.
Representative Adams is recognized.
To debate the amendment.
You recognized?
Second time. My opposition to this amendment is by this fact. We're talking about sunsetting the archaic system that we have in 6 years. In the meantime, what I intend to do is improve the pistol permit system as much as we possibly can. During our conversations, the question was posed, if we can make the pistol permit system as good as the NICS system, why wouldn't we stick with it? That's a great question. And my answer was the amendment I proposed earlier. And the language in this amendment that standardizes the application for the permit is also a good move in the right direction. So we're left with this. Do we sunset the law, continue to use the permit system until the sunset point, or do we leave the law in place and then review it again at some point in the future and figure out which system is better for North Carolinians? And what I'm saying to you is that I think that if we allow the law to sunset and we work together to improve the permit system, solve the basic problems we have with it, allow the NICS system to evolve as it naturally is, if we do that, the sheriffs will provide the information to the NICS system, which, by the way, does not track everybody in the United States. It creates files on criminals. And there are new sorting procedures or new algorithms being developed by the federal government every day to improve that system. By the way, the NICS system is used to evaluate top secret licenses in the federal government. It's a good system and it's an evolving system. It will ultimately provide the best remedy that we're talking about here. But there's another point. And I know you've seen some information on this, but this is about allocation of resources. It was mentioned to me that the average cost of a permit, to issue a permit by a sheriff's department, was about $37.50. So we made some inquiries, and our first inquiry was to Forsyth County, and they were very quick to provide us with some good information. They issued like 26,728 permits at a cost of $50.74 each. Okay? They were very quick. They had exactly the information we were seeking, and I absolutely applaud them for the efficiency of delivering the information that we wanted. Now, Randolph County said that they could do a permit for $12.06, and Wake County responded by saying they did a permit for $5.29. So we've got a 10-to-1 disparity here. If you split the difference, well, I'll just say this. $50 seems reasonable to me. If you talk about the handling of the money, the staff to do it, the printing of the applications, the printing of the permits. Now, this does not take into account the time that a person applying for the permit has to take off from work to go and make the application, and the time that person has to take off from work to go and pick up the permit. Doesn't take into account that. But if you do the math, according to this report, I think you've got a copy of it, Pistol Purchases Permit Revocations. This is a report from August 2014, and it reviews 98 counties, and where the sheriff's offices submitted 694,806 permits for review. Well, whether it's $37.50 or $50 to produce a permit with a $5 return, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars. And I would remind you that over 95% of the people that are going to the sheriff's office to get this permit to purchase a pistol are law-abiding citizens. And of the few that are rejected, according to sheriffs I've talked to, most of them are mistaken or confused identity. We're putting a lot of money into an activity that produces very little results. Now, if we move to the NICS system, it's a federal system, and the background check is done instantly and at no cost to the state. So think about the allocation of resources and the millions of dollars that are being appropriated for this type of activity and the results that it produces, when we could very simply, now I will say this, I am in favor of keeping the sheriffs connected into this process.
Representative Adams, you have about 10 seconds to wind up.
Well, I think you get my point. Thank you.
Representative Myers recognized to debate the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask Representative Pittman a question.
Will Representative Pittman yield for a question?
Yes, sir.
Representative Pittman, you based your opposition to this amendment in your stance on the Second Amendment. You quoted half of the Second Amendment. Would you be willing to quote the entire Second Amendment for us?
Well-regulated militia being necessary. Okay. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the defense of a free people, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be amended. infringed.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask a second question?
Do you yield, Representative Pittman?
Yes, sir.
He yields.
Representative Pittman, can you give us your own definition or a definition of the first phrase in that amendment, a well-regulated militia, and tell us how it applies to your beliefs about this amendment?
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Representative Lewis is recognized for point of order.
The gentleman's questions do not seem to be relevant to the bill.
Representative Meyer, could you make your point without dialogue with Representative Pittman just as easily?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
I was ready to answer.
All right.
I'd like to speak on
You're
the bill.
recognized to debate the bill. Debate the amendment.
I think that one problem with this bill altogether and this amendment in particular is the difficulty of the legal ground of the Second Amendment. The phrase a well-regulated militia is one of the most unclear legal phrases in our Constitution. We've already passed several bills this session that are likely to face constitutional challenges, and I believe this is another one, and this amendment brings that issue up. But let me speak to another piece of this amendment, the role of sheriffs. If you go all the way back to the Wild, Wild West, most Wild West towns had a law in place that when you came into town, you had to turn your guns over to the sheriff. In fact, the most famous gunfight in history, the gunfight at the OK Corral, began when a group of cowboys rode into town and Wyatt Earp expected them to turn over their guns, and they refused to do so. Those of this body who want to take away the role of the sheriff in controlling handguns are in favor of liberalizing gun laws beyond what they were in the Wild, Wild West. I think the sheriffs have the right and the ability to continue to help us to have protected communities. I support the amendment.
Representative Pittman is recognized to debate the amendment for a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, Representative Meyer's question leads me into what I was going to say to start with. Because I wonder, who remembers what happened April 18th, 75? Talking about 1775. Remember the midnight ride of Paul Revere? He was riding through the countryside warning patriots that the British were coming. And they weren't coming to tea. They were coming to confiscate the weapons of the militia, who were the able-bodied young men and old men and in between of the citizenry who were prepared to defend their freedom. That's what the militia is. They were coming to confiscate their weapons. And I thank God today that they already had their weapons. And that
for what purpose does Representative Meyer rise?
Mr. Speaker, I would ask if the gentleman's comments are relevant to the amendment.
Absolutely, they are.
The point is not well taken, and Representative Pittman will be winding up soon.
But as I was saying, I thank God that they didn't have to go to some guardhouse and get their weapons. They had them at home. They didn't have to wait for some sheriff to give them a permit to get the weapons to defend their freedom. If they had, we might still be a British colony today. Because what the British were coming to do was to impose tyranny on our founding fathers. And because they didn't have to wait for some government official to give them permission to have the weapons, they were able to defend their freedom, and we won our freedom as a nation. I believe that the pistol purchase permit system begins to impose that kind of government tyranny on our citizens. And we don't need to tolerate that. We've tolerated it for too long. We need to get rid of that system. And so I'm still opposed to this amendment because it would seek to perpetuate an unjust system that is contrary not only to the Constitution but to the very meaning of the freedom of our nation and how we were able to obtain it. And so I ask you to vote down this amendment. Thank you.
I intend to recognize Representative Schaefer, the sponsor of the bill, then Representative McNeil, the sponsor of the amendment, and then to ask Representative McNeil to make a motion on this amendment if necessary. Representative Schaefer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to oppose this amendment, and I just want to touch on a few quick points. A lot of folks have talked about the Second Amendment and the right to defend oneself and the right to have access to firearms for that purpose, and those are all laudable arguments. But I want to talk about something else that I referenced in my introduction, and that was about strengthening background checks. That has gotten lost somewhere in here, and thankfully Representative Burr brought that up in his comments on this amendment. But the entire purpose of Section 11 is to significantly strengthen the NICS background check system, which I want to remind everyone, that is the current system that we are using for long guns. But even though we are currently using that system, there are things that could be better about it. We want to take the next several years to significantly change it, to make it better, and to make it a stronger background check for the long gun purchases, but also for the handgun purchases. Some folks have raised a concern about what are we going to do about private transfers. That concern has been addressed by Representative Lewis's amendment that we passed earlier this afternoon. So I would ask for members to strongly consider opposing this amendment. Representative Faircloth brought up a great point about, there may be a few scoundrels, and so we should not be, crucifying an entire class of people based on a few scoundrels. Now, I don't disagree with that point, but I would like to make the point that there are no scoundrels in a computerized system that provides an instant background check, that we're going to work over the next 4 to 6 years in significantly strengthening and making sure that all of these important pieces of data are properly uploaded to that system. I would ask for the members to oppose this amendment, help us modernize and join these 32 other states that are moving to the NICS background check system while still leaving that in place for those private transfers, as Representative Lewis's amendment has already done. Thank you, and please vote no.
Representative McNeil is recognized.
Thank you, and I'll try and be brief also. I just want to answer a couple of points that's been brought up in reference to what Representative Burr said. If somebody commits a crime in South Carolina and they run a NICS check on it, the sheriff runs a NICS check, they'll get that same information. It doesn't matter. In Representative Hager's comment about 34 other states using it, we don't know what those 34 states' information they send in. We know that North Carolina does not send in enough information. We don't have that information on those other states. And Representative Adams, my amendment actually has an electronic process in it so the person can fill out the application electronically. But anyway, to basically wind this up, and I know you've all heard about this probably about all you want to, but this amendment is about a basic thing. This amendment is about keeping the sheriff's permit system intact. NICS, as the own bill sponsor says, does not have enough information in it. That's why they have so much language in here reforming NICS. The difference is this. They want to repeal it, then fix NICS. I say we fix NICS, and then we'll talk about a repeal. I can't understand why all my colleagues all of a sudden are so much in favor of the federal government as opposed to the sheriff. But anyway, I'd rather I can go down and talk to my sheriff, and I can vote against him if he's not doing the right thing. But anyway, the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer. I think he should retain the pistol permit system, and I'd appreciate your green vote. And if necessary, I'll call the question, but I don't see any other lights.
Further discussion or debate? If not, the question before the House is the McNeil amendment. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. Yeah, as soon as I announce the vote, turn us back up. Clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. The ayes are 77, the noes are 38. The amendment is passed.
Members, we're going to now return back to Representative Turner's amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Cumberland, Representative Floyd Rice?
Can I be recognized after Representative Turner inquiry with the chair?
So the gentleman's recognized, may state his inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, we're making good times on these amendments, and just wanting to know how many we have remaining, and is there any process way that we can sort of speeded the process up. We're doing a good job on that.
The gentleman's sarcasm is duly noted. For what purpose does the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Cunningham, rise?
Sorry, not yet.
Okay.
Thank you.
For what purpose? Actually, we're back on Representative Turner's amendment. I believe Representative Turner had debated the amendment, had explained it, and had yielded the floor. So we're now back on the Turner amendment. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wake, Representative Pendleton, rise?
To speak on, to introduce an amendment.
Okay, well, we're presently on Representative Turner's amendment that we displaced earlier.
I thought you called on me. I'm sorry. I misunderstood you.
Well, the gentleman's light was on. So, for what purpose does the gentleman from Mecklenburg, Representative Jeter, rise?
To debate the Turner amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
I rise in support of this amendment for a couple of key reasons. Under North Carolina statute, the definition of domestic violence is not codified in one single place. It's codified in many places. As a result, there are things that would be considered domestic violence that we are changing the law on if this amendment does not pass. If this amendment does not pass and you are convicted of stalking, you may now get a concealed carry permit in 3 years. Under current law, that is not permissible. I do not see any reason or any meritorious reason why we would allow someone convicted of stalking and all the data that shows the repeatness of that offense to go out and get a concealed carry gun. Under current North Carolina, they can't do it. If we do not vote for this amendment, we are going to allow them to do something they've never been allowed to do in this state. Misdemeanor child abuse would be taken away as one of the things that prohibit you from getting a concealed carry permit. Maybe I'm on the wrong side here, but I feel like if you beat up a child, you shouldn't have a concealed carry permit. You shouldn't just have to wait 3 years. If there is, I know we talked about pistol permit. I know that's important. To me, there is no singular more important amendment than the Turner Amendment. This protects the women and the children with laws that are already in place. If we don't pass this amendment, 3 years after your wife, 3 years after your daughter is stalked, her perpetrator can get a gun, concealed carry license, and we know the data says they're repeat offenders. This is the number one amendment. I strongly advise us and request us to vote yes.
For what purpose does the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Cunningham, rise?
Thank you. To speak to the amendment.
The lady has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of Representative Turner's amendment. A couple of months ago, a young lady living in Mecklenburg County was stalked. She moved here from Pennsylvania, and her mate followed her. He stalked her for several years. He came to her house at about 4 o'clock in the morning, banging on the door. She called the police. The police came, and they took him about 3 miles away from her house. Well, about 7 o'clock, he returned to her house. And he came on in the house and started beating her in the house while the children were getting ready to go to school. The article was printed in the paper. I guess I should finish the story. He beat her and drug her into the kitchen. He didn't kill her with a gun. He pulled the gas line out and blew the house up. She was a nurse. She worked at Novant Healthcare Center in Matthews. The article that was printed in the paper said that the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department had access to databases and the third they did not access. So I called the SBI and I talked to the Domestic Violence Coalition and the Women's Commission, and I talked to Representative Turner about what had happened to this young lady. And it is not unusual that this happens, but they couldn't trace back that there was a long history on this young man in Philadelphia for domestic violence. Because when you come to Mecklenburg County or the state of North Carolina, you should file your protective custody, your protective order. And lots of women don't know that, or whoever the victim may be, don't know that they should file it. And when the police arrive, you need to have it in hand so they don't have to go looking for it. But that's why I rise in support of the amendment, because NICS don't catch everything. It catches some things. But that local sheriff may know that there's been 3 calls for domestic violence at that house. That sheriff might know that the individual has a mental disorder that the NICS system don't know, and that individual may not have a criminal record because it was not one established. So those are some of the reasons that I think, I'm not saying the sheriffs are perfect. Now, y'all know I'm not a big fan, but I'm with them on this one. I am with them on this. And I think it's the right thing to do is, if we want to move to NICS, let's move to NICS, but let's fix what we have instead of saying that it's no good at all, because I think it has worked somewhat. Thank you.
For what purpose does the lady from Iredell, Representative Turner, rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just urge you to support this amendment. We're trying to save lives, save families. Perhaps I don't express the concern I have with domestic violence well, because it became part of me as I served as clerk. It wasn't very long when I was in Iredell County's clerk's office when I saw a lady who came in. She had sunglasses on, and her arms, she had on a sleeveless blouse, but her arms were just so bruised, and I said, how can I help you? Because she looked like she could hardly stand up. And she was there to dismiss the action she had taken against her, the person who committed domestic violence against her, because she said, it was my fault, I invited him over. And I said, you didn't invite him to do this to you. And he had actually run over her with a car. So there are many forms of domestic violence. But this provision, this amendment that I'm running is not already in the bill. It does protect people. It does protect women who need, well, not just women. We've had male members also. But I do urge your support for this amendment. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Gaston, Representative Hastings, rise?
Well, I apologize, Mr. Speaker, but I need to clarify something before I can vote, and I wanted to see if Representative Jeter would yield for a question.
Does the gentleman from Mecklenburg yield to the gentleman from Gaston?
I'd be honored.
Yields. Representative Jeter, I think I heard you, and I apologize if I didn't hear you correctly. Did you say misdemeanor abuse when you were speaking earlier?
You heard it when I said it. You heard it at the same time I heard it. I don't know. Yes, at one point I said misdemeanor abuse. To which reference you're talking to, I honestly don't know the answer to that.
For what purpose does the gentleman continue to rise?
To see if Representative Turner would.
Does the lady from Iredell yield to the gentleman from Gaston?
I'd be happy to.
She yields.
Representative Turner, just before I get ready to push this button, will you tell me again, you mentioned stalking, or one of the members mentioned stalking and also abuse. Will you clarify those two crimes for me, exactly what you're meaning to do in this amendment, please?
If you are convicted of these offenses, it would be a lifetime ban.
Further discussion, further debate. For what purpose does the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Schaefer, rise?
to debate the amendment a second time.
Lady has the floor to debate the amendment a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again to Representative Turner for bringing forth this amendment. As I said before, the amendment had been displaced. I rise in a very careful and deliberate opposition to the amendment. It is not to say that these domestic violence issues and some of the other issues that have been mentioned are not worthy of definite consideration and protection. My concern here is that I do believe that these issues are accounted for already in the current language of the bill, and I believe that what is happening in this amendment is that there is a problem that is believed to be there that is not actually there, and the resolution to that problem is overcompensating effectively for a problem that's not actually there. I think it takes a wider swipe at what we're trying to do. If there are further specific narrowing, more restrictive language that we need to come up with, that may be the case. However, this amendment, I do not believe that this amendment is the way to do it, and I would respectfully ask the members to oppose the amendment. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Nash, Representative Collins, rise?
Ask the amendment sponsor a question.
Does the lady from Iredell yield to the gentleman from Nash?
I yield.
He shields.
Representative Turner, I thought I understood what this amendment was all about until right at the end. The very last thing you said kind of gave me a shiver. You're saying that now all of these misdemeanors, which I'll be honest with you, I have no idea what all these GSs are, but for all of these misdemeanors that are listed here, people could be banned from purchasing a handgun for life? Yes. For misdemeanor offenses?
Concealed weapon permit, yes.
Speak briefly on
Does the gentleman wish to
speak briefly on the amendment?
The gentleman is recognized to debate the amendment.
Yes, not knowing what all of these multitude of offenses are here, but knowing that they're all misdemeanors gives me great pause before taking this privilege away from our citizens for a lifetime for misdemeanor offenses. Obviously, this is not serious abuse or battery if they've gotten away with a misdemeanor. Felonies are already dealt with in this bill. We're talking about misdemeanor offenses and taking away a person's constitutional right for a lifetime. Now, a lot of the argument we've heard here is pretty irrelevant. I mean, we've heard about people killing other people by gas lines and running over them with cars and all that kind of stuff, which has got nothing to do with pistol permits or concealed carry permits or anything else. But I'm very loath to take away somebody's constitutional rights for a lifetime based on a misdemeanor offense. So I think I'm going to have to vote against this amendment.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wake, Representative Stam, rise?
To clarify the definition of misdemeanor.
The gentleman is recognized to debate the amendment.
A misdemeanor, by definition, is something for which you can get up to 2 years in prison. It's not necessarily a trivial crime. Those would be infractions or Class 3 misdemeanors. For example, for what can you impeach the President of the United States? High crimes and misdemeanors.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Gaston, Representative Hastings, rise?
I apologize, Mr. Speaker. I need to see if Representative Turner would yield for one other question.
Does the lady from Iredell yield to the gentleman from Gaston?
I do.
She yields.
I apologize, but either I'm going to satisfy this in my own mind or I just won't vote because I'm not quite prepared. And I need to be prepared before I vote on this serious issue. Representative Stam was alluding to what I think would be A1 misdemeanors. And I've read the list of A1 misdemeanors. Are any of these misdemeanors you're addressing A1 misdemeanors, or do you know?
Staff says they are.
Follow up.
Does the lady yield to an additional question? She yields.
It sounds like we certainly do need to turn this session into a session where we create more felonies, Representative Stam. Representative Turner, these A1 misdemeanors, some of these, you can actually serve time for these, right?
That is correct.
Thank you, Representative Turner.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Cumberland, Representative Glazier, rise?
To briefly debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in support of the amendment, but just to highlight a point that Representative Hastings' questions brought out and Representative Stam's point, as a reminder in this arena, misdemeanors occur, and in North Carolina is the only state in the country, actually, 49 other states define misdemeanor as punishment by 1 year or less. We define misdemeanor as 2 years or less. That is, we are the only state in the country that has a much higher misdemeanor. A lot of things we classify as misdemeanors, most states classify as felonies. That's the first point. The second point is, lots of times, particularly in this arena, as Representative Turner has really pointed out, I think, there are really felony issues that have been done. That is, the act is really a felony. But it is pled down to a misdemeanor, sometimes because the woman is so battered she refuses to testify and it's the best the prosecutor can get. Sometimes because witnesses are not available where incidents happen. There are a whole host of reasons. But at a minimum, we're talking about very serious misdemeanors. And just by way of final example, if you look at the stalking section and definition, which is an A1 misdemeanor, that is multiple acts over a period of time, where the person monitors, follows, observes, surveils, threatens, and communicates threats to a person with the intent to torment, terrorize, or terrify the person. I really don't want that person having a gun or the capacity to carry concealed in only 3 years. There may be other things to do, and there may be some gradation that one day is needed, but this isn't the gradation that's needed. I really support Representative Turner's amendment.
Further discussion, further debate on the amendment? If not, the question before the House is the passage of Amendment 4 set forth by Representative Turner. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. Representative Queen, does the gentleman wish to record on this vote? Representative Shepard, I don't see him. The clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. 87 having voted in the affirmative and 26 in the negative, the amendment is adopted. The gentleman from Johnson, Representative Daughtry, is recognized to send forth Amendment ASA 87. The clerk will read.
Representative Daughtry moves to amend the bill on page 2, line 36, through page 3, line 5, by deleting those lines.
The gentleman from Johnson has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a simple decision for you. We have in this bill, if this bill passes, if this amendment fails and the bill passes, it gives members in the General Assembly the right to carry a concealed weapon here in this body, in committee meetings and on the premise. And also it gives the right of the staff to carry a concealed weapon. I have thought about this a long time, and there are places where we don't need guns. There are places where we decide things by debate. We decide things, good ideas, by trying to convince you that this is the way to go. And that's why we're here. And it seems to me that having guns by anyone in the General Assembly is something that I don't support. I've been here a long time, and I've seen emotional issues where people get upset, and there are two sides, and they're not able to reconcile their differences. That happens all the time. You see it happen in this session. But having guns around doesn't help anybody, and I've never felt in my tenure here that I was in danger by the public, by the staff, or by the members. So I believe that allowing guns, concealed weapons, in the General Assembly should not be permitted, and that's what this amendment simply does. And I would appreciate your support.
For what purpose does the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Carney, rise?
To speak on the amendment.
The lady has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Daughtry, for bringing this amendment forward. I serve on the Rules Committee, and I was astounded when I was reading through this bill and saw this part in there. I've polled many people, staff people, some members, and for the nobody has given me a reason as to why this part in this bill is needed. Representative Daughtry said he's been here a long time and he's never felt afraid in this building. Well, I can assure you I've been here a long time too. I've never felt afraid in this building. But if we leave this in there, I'm going to feel more afraid than ever. It isn't a safety issue for House members, senators, and staff members in this building to carry weapons. We have our Capitol Police here, that if there's a problem, they're going to be there. I'm beginning to think this bill, in some aspects, is sending the message, because there's so many conflicting thoughts about the whole bill, and I know I'm on the amendment. There's so many issues that are not truly clarified by everybody on every side. So I'm beginning to think this bill is more about shoot now and ask later. This is one piece in this bill we do not need. Please, I ask you, let's keep civility in our chambers, within our building. Let's not have school children coming here from fourth grades that come and learn about North Carolina history and have it said by their teachers that now when you're there, they've passed a law that says they can all on that floor carry a gun. And teachers tell their children, their students, what laws we pass up here. And I mean, you might think that sounds ridiculous, but you drill it down to a fourth grader level. Are we really smarter than a fourth grader? I cannot imagine why anyone in here feels they have to pack a gun and to come in here to session, to walk into this building, to walk into your office. And I'm going on and on because of the absurdity of this section in this bill. No one has given me a reason. I'm sure somebody's going to stand up and tell me why it's needed. About the rights, Second Amendment rights. Well, I have rights too that may not agree with all of what you think. But this is an absurd section in this bill. I ask you all to please vote yes to take it out.
For what purpose does a gentleman from Nash, Representative Collins, arise?
To debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Well, let me just say, I'm the author of this part of the bill. This was a separate bill. In fact, this bill we're looking at was about 4 or 5 bills that got mashed together. I would have preferred it to have remained separate, but that's not what happened. It got mashed into the gun bill. And my thoughts on this were nothing like either of the representatives before me have stated. I certainly didn't try to put this in here because I feel like I need to shoot it out with anybody else in this house, and I can't imagine us getting into a shooting match here in the house. That was the farthest thing from my mind. But I do know that we do have a lot of things here that do threaten our security. My seatmate and I were sitting same general locations 3 seats back the first session we were here when a member of the public busted through that gold door there yelling and screaming and got right beside Mike's seat before they were apprehended. Now, I don't think that person had a weapon on them. I don't know. There were 5 people actually that came through the door. Well, I just saw the one that got beside us. That made my eyes get pretty big. We know last session we had people break into the speaker's office. Fortunately, when there was no one there, and at least one of those people had several weapons on him. We have a lot of people that come here and say a lot of inflammatory things about some of us and try to get people riled up. And I think it's just a matter of time until we have an incident here. We know that people who do go off and do crazy things, and I don't think the average person who thinks we're passing bad policy or anything is going to go on a shooting rampage, but some crazy people do, and they tend to go to places where they feel safe because there's either nobody or a very limited number of people who have weapons there. So part of it is for protection. Part of it is also this. I would like to see this building continue to be the building of the people as long as it possibly can be. I can remember when I was a kid and went to the U.S. Capitol in Washington with my parents, and then later as a teenager. And I remember you could wander around there, and they kept most of the doors to the bottom floor were open. You could just walk in any door you wanted to. And as a kid, I was just agog. You'd walk down one hall, and there'd be a fresco on the ceiling. You'd walk down another hall, and there'd be statues lining the halls. And it was just amazing. It was incredible. Last time I went, you had to go in a tent, and get patted down and everything, go through the metal detectors. Here, This is probably one of the few buildings right around us where you can still go in. I know a lot of the buildings I try to go in, they're locked. You go over to the governor's office, you have to go through the metal detectors there. I'd like to defer that as long as possible in this building. I really rue the day when one day we have to have metal detectors at the doors and everybody has to go through one at a time and it takes 30 minutes for a school class to get in and so forth. I'd like to see that postponed just as long as possible. So to me, now you can't do anything about somebody who's willing to commit suicide. You really can't. But for anybody else, if they're coming in thinking they can shoot up the place because, there's only a half a dozen or so General Assembly police here, and I kind of know where they hang out, and I can get in the corner of a building where they're not and wreak havoc and get out. It's a whole different story if you don't know whether the person in that office might draw back at you, or whether somebody in the next office might be able to come in and defend those people or whatever. There is a deterrent effect to not knowing who's armed in a place. Now, on the other hand, I don't want people going crazy either. I talked to Chief Weaver, the chief of the General Assembly Police here, and asked him what he thought about this bill when I got ready to introduce it early in the session. And he said he would not take an official position on it. He'd neither support it nor oppose it. He said the only thing that concerned him was knowing who is carrying. In other words, he wants to know who the good guys, who the legitimate people and the bad people are. If somebody pulls out a weapon, he wants to know who they are. He says he knows, he sees it all the time. Off-duty law enforcement people come in here and all, and he can tell they're carrying concealed, although his staff is, hasn't been made aware of it or whatever. So I did put a provision in this bill where before any of us could make use of this exception, we would have to go over and register with the General Assembly Police and say, yes, sign on the dotted line, I plan on taking advantage of this exception. Now, we have given this exception already to judges in courtrooms. It's not like it's something outlandish that we've never done before. But I see it more as a deterrent and something that will help us keep this building to be the people's building for as long as possible. I also have been criticized on this bill by some gun rights advocates because they say, well, you're creating a special class, you're making legislators special and blah, blah, blah. Well, we did that for the judges in the courtroom, and I included the legislative staff here because they have to be in the building more than I do. And frankly, somebody who comes in here with some crazy ideas probably won't know one from the other. I have walked through the crowd that used to come here on Monday nights before. I walked through a couple of years ago with two fellow legislators. And as I was passing through, I heard a person say to some other people, they're staff people. So they don't know who the staff people are and who the legislators are. So I felt like it was only right to include staff people. If we're going to be able to defend ourselves, then the staff people ought to be able to have the same privilege. Again, this is only for those of us, whether staff members or legislators, who have concealed carry permits. I'm not saying everybody comes armed to the General Assembly. I would hope you would defeat this amendment and pass this part of the bill, strictly because I would like to see us have whatever protection we can have here, and also like to see the deterrent effect so that the zaniness will be postponed as long as eventually we'll have an incident here in this building. I have no doubts about that. But I'd like to postpone that day as long as possible. Eventually we're going to have metal detectors the way our society's heading. One day we'll have to have metal detectors.
Mr. Speaker.
But I'd like to postpone that day as long as possible.
If the gentleman will suspend, for what purpose does a lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Carney, arise?
To ask the gentleman a question.
Would the gentleman from Nash yield to the lady
Certainly.
from Mecklenburg? He yields. Lady may propound her question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Collins. I want to be clear. You're saying, if this is what your intent is, you want to keep, as long as we can, keep the metal detectors out, keep those deterrents out for the people's house, and yet you're saying you want members to carry concealed weapons to become our protectors if someone crashes in?
The gentleman has the floor to respond.
I would say yes. I would feel much better protected if 30 people in this whole complex are carrying weapons and the person coming in the building doesn't know who they are, and I don't know who they are either. Absolutely. I certainly would. These are people that have concealed carry permits. These are not people off the streets that have bought a gun and just popped in and don't know how to use them. Absolutely. So again, I guess I need to state clearly, I would ask that you oppose this amendment. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wake, Representative Martin, arise?
To debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm glad to hear from the gentleman from Nash what the reasoning behind this portion was, because I was unable to discern it myself. I wanted to echo the comments of the gentleman from Johnson about what this place means, and that this is one of those places where I think we don't need to have guns. There's many great things about our democratic system, or any democratic system. One, of course, is that it allows the people to have their voice expressed through their elected officials. The people rule themselves. One of the other good things about a democratic system is it allows the people to resolve their differences peacefully. There are places on this earth where almost everyone does have a gun, and the people do not resolve their differences peacefully. And ladies and gentlemen, you do not want to live in those places, and you do not want to raise your children in those places at all. So the justification I heard from the gentleman from Nash for this portion of the bill is for the security of those who are in the legislative complex. And I think that that justification represents a serious misunderstanding about what sort of security could be brought by concealed carry permit holders. Dozens, or I think as I read this provision, hundreds possibly in the legislative complex. It is one thing to go out on a range and put some rounds downrange and pretty consistently get a nice shot group, center mass on the target time after time after time. I've even managed to do that more often than not. It's a very, very different matter under the type of stressful circumstances and the hypotheticals, or actually actual examples that the gentleman from Nash gave. Your heart rate is up, adrenaline is flowing, and that has a significant effect on your ability to put rounds on target. In fact, I'd go so far as to say your ability to put rounds on target on a nice, quiet, sunny day out on the range where no one but your drill sergeant is yelling at you, if you've even got that, really has very little bearing on your ability to do it under a stressful situation.
Representative Martin, the chair sincerely apologizes to the gentleman. Pages, we thank you for your service. You are dismissed for the day. The gentleman from Wake has the floor and may continue his debate.
Was my rhetoric that bad, Mr. Speaker, that you had to send the pages away? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So it's a mistake to think that arming dozens or even hundreds of folks whose only training has been, for the most part, through the concealed carry process is somehow going to make us safer. In the examples that the gentleman from Nash gave, for example, where someone burst into our chambers and came down the aisle, how is having 120 of us all armed going to make us safer? I would suggest you get down to your local gym and take a jiu-jitsu class or come join me in an Army combatives class. It's going to be much more relevant. It's going to protect us better, and it's going to make the place a whole lot safer without endangering your fellow member. If, on the other hand, 120 of us have our adrenaline up, our pulse rate firing up around 170, even if you are able to discern under that stressful situation who the actual intended target is, it will have a significant effect on your aim. Your judgment will be impaired, and your aim will be impaired, and you are in the end a greater danger to your fellow legislator and your fellow members of the legislative community. So both because of the symbolic value of what this place represents to our democracy that the gentleman from Johnson expressed, as a place where we come to peacefully resolve our differences, but even more importantly for the negative practical effect that this provision has on the safety of members and staff and visitors to the legislative complex, I will be supporting this amendment.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Catawba, Representative Adams, arise?
To debate the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
You know, once in a while people make prognostications about results, and very few times they write a book about it. Dr. John Lott was an economist with University of Chicago in the mid-90s, and he had an opportunity to pick up a grant to do research, and he scrolled through all the possible things that he could to do research on, and one of them was the effect of concealed carry on crime. And he began his research not knowing anything about guns. And he concluded with his research that concealed carry would have a dramatic impact on crime. And he wrote a book about it in 1997. Interestingly, he has now updated the book and showed where all of his predictions, virtually all of his predictions, came true. Florida was the first state that enjoyed the reduction in crime that concealed carry predictably causes. Concealed carry is about deterrence. That's what it's about. It's not about everybody packing guns in TV speak. It's about the very possibility that a law-abiding person might be carrying a weapon when a criminal is about to act. And it deters that activity. Now, according to Dr. Lott, less than 2% of the people who have concealed carry licenses will ever carry. So it's not like everybody in the chamber is going to be carrying a gun or is going to be required to carry a gun or anything like that. It's simply about the fact that if somebody has mischief in their mind and they think that one of us or two of us or five of us may be armed, that it will deter their behavior. It works. It has worked for almost 20 years. And I urge you to defeat this amendment.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Cumberland, Representative Floyd, arise?
To debate the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment. I arrived in here at approximately the same time Representative Colley arrived here. And I arrived, under the pretense that we had a safe environment in which to work in. This is a concealed weapon permit that I received in 2008. I have yet to go through the course for the weapon that's training itself to carry a concealed weapon, because I was under the impression that I was working in a safe environment. And if you look at the bill itself, just want to let you know that I receive one of these every Thursday. And that's the envelope that my paycheck for the service that I render here in the General Assembly on every Thursday. But lo and behold, I get an electronic draft for that. But if you bear in mind the way the amendment reads, the amendment states that you only have to go and submit that to the police, our local police, once. Once, that's all you have to do. And you can carry it on the grounds of the General Assembly. Now, when you look at that, since that time we have reduced the number of law enforcement officers that we have in the General Assembly. Now, for me, I don't know that many on the other side, because certain committees I serve on and they don't serve on, so I don't get a chance to interact with them, and I don't know them that well. But what we are asking this small police department, they can become robot cops. Half chips is to identify whether or not you have a facial recognition that the robot cop can identify with, or the other half of the chip identify whether or not you have a handgun permit. We're asking them to do that in a multiple of a second. Now, bear in mind, I have a cell phone that I wear on the side. So that person may perceive that I am a threat because I'm making a call saying that there's a life-threatening situation here. And it may be mine because he may perceive that I'm picking or I'm using a concealed gun or getting ready to use that. So my wife will be coming to my funeral because he may not know that I have a concealed weapon permit, nor that he has time to determine whether or not I have one or not. His job is to provide to make sure that the grounds are safe. As an example, let's look at this. There's 67,000 youth that utilize this facility every day. There's 7,000 a year. There's 7,000 visitors from in-state, out-of-state that come here. We have 4 courts. As you look around every day, there's activities in these courts here. When we look at our event calendar, we see that it's full. Our Sheriff Association doesn't support this particular bill. The question that remains, and someone said it earlier, do we want this General Assembly to become Dodge City, Kansas? Do we want this General Assembly to become that? I cannot see no purpose. Now, when we look at the total picture of those individuals that will be carrying handguns, we're talking about a total of 664 individuals that receive something through this envelope
Mr.
here.
Speaker?
For what purpose does the lady from Surrey, Representative Stevens, arise?
See if Representative Floyd would yield for a question.
Does the gentleman from Cumberland yield to the lady from Surrey?
Thank you. Representative
I think he
Floyd,
yields.
I'm at the point where I would really welcome your normal motion.
I wish I could. And you're right. My question...
The gentleman has the floor to continue his debate.
My question is that there's 664 persons that can receive a gun permit, not including the 170 men and women of both House chambers. So that to me would be, in closing, a wild, wild west if all of us, our LAs, including the custodians and our interns, will receive concealed weapon permit. So I'm in support of the amendment.
Members, the Chair would direct your attention to Rule 10 of the Rule Book, Rule 10B, which lists the amount of time that a member may speak on every matter the first time to 15 minutes and a limit of 10 minutes for the second speech. Rule 10E gives permission by leave of the House to change the rule for this discussion, this debate only, to allow 5 minutes per speaking. Is there objection to changing the time to 5 minutes per speaker? Is there, if there's objection, if a member would rise? Representative Hall, does the member object to changing the time in which a member may speak on the main question from 15 minutes to 5 minutes for the first time and 5 minutes for the second time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, just a question of defining what this applies to. Does this apply only to this amendment or for the rest of this bill tonight? Or
Representative Hall, this would apply only to the amendments on this bill that are going to be considered in today's session.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there objection? Seeing none, it is ordered. For what purpose does the gentleman from Catawba, Representative Setzer, arise?
To speak on the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I have been here for 17 years, and I would like to address some statements that were made here today. Now, we have a very talented and trained staff of Sergeant-at-Arms members, and I was here the day that the couple came through the back doors. I didn't see any of our members get up to assist them, but they certainly took them back out of this room very quickly. Matter of fact, I stood up and went to a page that was up here at the front desk and told them, it will settle in a minute. We are well protected. I believe that then, and I believe that now. And don't ever think that the General Assembly Police don't know who we are and who the staff people are in this building, because they are constantly and diligently looking after our safety. I do not have any qualms about the security in this building. Something could happen, but it hadn't happened yet, and we're blessed by that purpose. But you need to remember, the Sergeant-at-Arms keep us safe. They deal with us and endure us every day, and so does the General Assembly Police, and they are due that respect, and I think we should remember that.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Craven, Representative Speciale, arise?
To speak on the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
Yeah, we've had a lot of red herrings thrown out here about all this. The gentleman that was in the Army, I understand why he would be nervous about being around guns, but There are some of us here that are highly qualified with guns, 20 years in the Marines. I went through police training. I'm used to having guns around. Just because we put ourselves in a position where we can carry does not necessarily mean we all will. Sometimes I do carry, sometimes I don't. And I guess the idea is for the criminal to try and guess which days I'm not carrying. The whole point here, this building that belongs to the people. It is their building. It's one of the few left in the country that does not have metal detectors at the doors, and we want to keep it that way. I enjoy watching those kids come in the building. I enjoy watching the parents and the teachers come in. A lot of you don't realize this, but a lot of times they will, because of my location, they will walk those kids through my office so they can see the inside of an office and back around the building. We want to keep that going. We want to keep that flow going. But just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't. Now, when I walk out of this building, most days I'm protected. I'm able to protect myself. But why, when I walk into this building, I should have to give up my right to protect myself and those around me? I don't understand that. What we're doing is not something strange or unusual. We did this for district attorneys, assistant district attorneys, magistrates, judges. Many of your county commissioners sit in their meetings with concealed weapons. Some of you probably didn't know that. It's not unusual. We're in a position where people might get upset about things that we do and decisions we make. But to make it appear as if we're going to have a shootout at the OK Corral in this room when we are in heavy debate is just a red herring. You know that's not going to happen. It's the same excuse that was given by those who opposed in 1995, who opposed the concealed carry regulations. Oh, it's going to be shootout at the OK Corral. The first year we're going to have 250,000 people getting concealed carry. Do you know it took over 10 years to get 250,000 people to apply for concealed carry in North Carolina? So let's not over-exaggerate. Let's understand what it is we're doing here. Again, there may be nobody in this room that actually carries into this chamber. On the other hand, as a free nation, as a free people, we should have the right to protect ourselves no matter where we're at. And so I ask you to think about that. While we've gotten a position, for some reason, in this country where we fight, we know what we want, and we don't care what everybody else wants. For those of you who don't like guns, my suggestion is don't carry them. Don't get one. Just don't deny me that right to protect myself, and hopefully protect you if somebody does bust in that door. And this, again, everybody is not untrained. And many of you, honestly, if something happens, will be the first one saying, I hope somebody's got a gun, I hope somebody's got a gun, I hope somebody's got a gun. And hopefully there will be someone in here who can stop the carnage. If you do a little Googling on school shootings, you will see that many school shootings have been stopped. School shooters have been stopped in their tracks. How? By principals who went to their car and got the gun that they were not supposed to have there in the first place. By vice principals, by teachers who went to their car and got the gun out of their car that they were not supposed to have in the first place.
Mr. Speaker.
We can leave our guns in the car in the parking lot under the building, okay? Don't make us have to run all the way downstairs to our car when
the
somebody
gentleman will suspend. For what purpose does the lady from Orange, Representative Vinska, rise?
To ask the representative a question.
Does the gentleman from Craven yield to the lady from Orange?
I yield.
Representative Special, would I know when you have a gun on you? If we pass this bill, would I know?
You're not supposed to know.
Would I know when...
Does the lady wish to ask a second question?
Second question.
Does the gentleman yield to a second question?
I yield.
Would I know when 10 people in here would have a gun, a concealed weapon?
You're not supposed to know.
A follow-up?
Does the gentleman yield to a third question?
Do you think I would feel safer?
I can't help it how you would feel. Honestly.
Follow-up.
But you should.
Does the gentleman yield to an additional question?
I do.
He yields.
Don't you think you should care about how all of us feel about safety in this chamber, the people's house?
I'd like to answer that question. Can I answer that?
The gentleman has the floor to respond, yes.
I do care about, that's why I want to be able to protect you if something goes wrong.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Harnett, Representative Lewis, rise?
Speak very briefly on the amendment and then to offer a motion, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized to debate the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that both sides have had an adequate opportunity to express their concerns and their ideas on this amendment. Therefore, I would like to be recognized
for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the previous question.
The gentleman from Harnett has moved the previous question. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. Clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. 72 having voted in the affirmative, 38 in the negative. The previous question having been adopted. The House will immediately vote on the amendment. Those in favor of Amendment 6 offered by Representative Daughtry will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. The clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. 69 having voted in the affirmative, 44 in the negative. The amendment is adopted. Representative, just a moment. The gentleman from Wake, Representative Pendleton, is recognized to send forth Amendment ASA 86. The clerk will read.
Representative Pendleton moves to amend the bill on page 15, lines 22 through page 16, lines 2, by deleting those lines.
For what purpose did the gentleman from Cumberland, Representative Floyd, rise?
Mr. Speaker, H526-ASH-57, version 2. May I have it returned, please?
The amendment will be returned to the gentleman. The gentleman from Wake, Representative Pendleton, has the floor to debate the amendment.
I rise to make to issue an amendment, offer an amendment, and Representative Lambeth and I worked together on this. As you know, he's a former hospital administrator of one of the biggest hospitals in North Carolina. But this amendment will take out any language telling a medical provider how they have to practice medicine. And that's the bottom line.
Further discussion, further debate on the amendment? If not, the question before the House is the adoption of Amendment 7 offered by Representative Pendleton. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. Clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. 61 having voted in the affirmative and 51 in the negative. The amendment is adopted. The gentleman from Durham, Representative Lukey, is recognized to send forth Amendment ASA 80. Clerk will read.
Representative Lukey moves to amend the bill on page 3, line 48 through page 4, lines 3, by deleting those lines.
The gentleman from Durham has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this amendment, members of the House, relates to Section 4 of the bill, bottom of page 3, top of page 4. Section 4A of the bill is the one which gives our Commissioner of Agriculture the right to decide whether or not firearms should be allowed at the state fair. I think, as everyone knows, Commissioner Troxler has made a decision that guns should not be at the fair, but the way the bill is written, the next Commissioner of Agriculture could decide otherwise. This amendment is about Section 4B of the bill. It has to do with the study that is indicated here that the Department of Agriculture should undertake to decide where guns could be stored at the entrance to the fair. These would be guns that those who have concealed carry permits would take out of their glove compartments and bring to the entrance of the fairgrounds. I think this amendment would take out that section 4B about this study. The reason I say that and advocate for this amendment is that the study is not necessary. Think about it. Members of the public already have the right to bring their guns with them in their cars, keep them in the parking, inside their cars. All this amendment is asking people to do is, should people be able to walk to the entrance of the fair with their gun, and then the Department of Agriculture would have to figure out where the guns should be stored. So we're asking the department to think about what is likely to be more personnel to be at the entrance of the fairs to take the guns, to then put them in, who knows what, safes, we're not really sure, and keep them there, presumably tagged by employees so we know whose weapon is whose, and then when the person leaves the fair to have to go back into the safe and find this weapon and return it to the owner. This is only for the right to go from your car to the entrance of the fair. To me, this makes no sense. The Commissioner Troxler has made a decision. Any Commissioner of Agriculture can make a decision up or down as to whether weapons should be allowed. If weapons are not allowed, as Commissioner Troxler has decided, the weapons are better left in the car, not walk to the entrance of the fair, making more work for fair personnel. Doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it makes sense, and I'd urge all of you to support this amendment as a superfluous part of the bill. Just take it out. Leave the powers to the Commissioner of Agriculture. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wake, Representative Pendleton, rise?
To speak against the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
This was put together with the sheriffs as a way people would be able to, and they're not taking them out of their glove boxes and bring them. These are pistols that people have concealed weapons permit on their person. So they would go to a check room at one entrance of the fair, the way they talked to me about it, and they would have lockers, and you would go in there and put the pistol in the locker. You would take the key. When they give you the key, they take your concealed weapons permit and hold it. So that way they guarantee they get the key back. But that's all it would do. People feel very, very vulnerable, and I do too, and I'm a big guy, walking back and forth to my car. So that's what the sheriffs want to do, is study it. Nothing may be able to come out of it, but I think it needs to be studied. Thank you.
Further discussion, further debate on the amendment? If not, the question for the House is the passage of Amendment A offered by Representative Lubke. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. The clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. 41 having voted in the affirmative and 73 in the negative, the amendment fails. The gentleman from Buncombe, Representative Ager, is recognized to send forth Amendment ASA 77. The clerk will read.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment...
Just a moment. The clerk needs to read the amendment. Then I'll recognize the gentleman to debate. Clerk will read.
Representative Ager moves to amend the bill on page 3, lines 34 through 37 by rewriting those lines to read.
Now the gentleman has the floor to debate the amendment.
I'll get the hang of it. This amendment would simply make the carrying of firearms at the Mountain State Fair at the Western North Carolina Ag Center, that it also would be at the discretion of the Secretary of Agriculture.
For what purpose does the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Schaefer, rise?
To debate the amendment.
Lady has the floor to debate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Ager, for bringing the amendment and also for chatting with me just before session started about this amendment. I have had a chance to look at it, and I would ask the members to oppose this amendment. The reason that we have this language concerning the Commissioner of Agriculture is that the State Fair has a very unique set of circumstances. Because of those unique set of circumstances that are not present in other areas around the state, we are making this very unique exception. And we would like to keep it simply to the State Fair because of those unique set of circumstances. So I would ask for the members to oppose the amendment. Thank you.
Does the gentleman from Buncombe desire further debate? I see the gentleman's light still on. Further, for what purpose does the gentleman from Cumberland, Representative Glazier, rise?
Briefly to ask Representative Schaefer a question, if I might.
Does the lady from Mecklenburg yield to the gentleman from Cumberland?
I do.
She yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative. In trying to think through this, could you explain what you believe are the unique circumstances so that we could sort of figure that out in comparison to how that differs from the Western North Carolina Ag Center Fair where the state fair is conducted there?
Sure. What we have learned over this last year of really looking at this issue concerns the top-notch law enforcement operation that they have going on over there, as well as the incredible numbers that come out during that 2-week period of time. Because of that, it does not make sense. It does not make sense for this to be allowed at the state fair. However, 2 years ago, one of the things that we did was that we wanted to allow concealed carry permit holders to be able to bring their weapons into situations like this. The state fair presented those unique set of circumstances, so we wanted to remove that from that particular permission for people.
Follow-up?
Does the lady yield to an additional question?
I yield.
She yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative. And that certainly makes sense as I understand it with regard to the state fairgrounds, but did you study the security issues of the Mountain State Fair and what they do or don't do in relation to deciding that it can't apply there? Do we have the same set of study to know that that's an issue or not an issue there?
We do not have specific numbers as far as the study that went into that. However, what the experts and those who do have the information have told me was that the state fair that we host here in Raleigh the numbers are significantly different from what is going on around the rest of the state. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Further discussion, further debate on the amendment? If not, the question for the House is the passage of Amendment 9 offered by Representative Ager. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. The clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. 46 having voted in the affirmative and 68 in the negative. The amendment fails. Members, there are presently before the chair, looks like 10 amendments that are pending right now. It's the chair's understanding that the minority party has requested to end at 5:30 today because of a scheduled event. The chair is inclined to allow a vote on second reading, and members can resubmit these amendments tomorrow. There is not a motion for previous question that is being proffered at this time. So if I see lights, I will take them. But my understanding is that there was some thought to members running amendments on third reading. For what purpose does the gentleman from Cabarrus, Representative Pittman, rise?
Inquire the chair.
The gentleman may state his inquiry.
I'm wondering, due to the previous amendment relative to the health care providers, if that renders my proposed amendment H562 ALH 34 version 6 irrelevant and something I can't run, or could that possibly be inserted in anyway?
Well, I believe the gentleman's amendment, I would have to take some time to review it, but it may be that the gentleman's amendment would have to be redrafted. One thing about this, and I think that the gentleman, when correcting the typo earlier, one thing we do once a bill passes, if we find out that there's a typo, we're permitted by statute to make those changes. I'm not sure where the music's coming from, but anyway, we're permitted to make those changes. So if we need to make conforming changes, we can. I will need to check with the clerk to see if that is, if there's an issue with.
Mr. Speaker, that's not I. Whatever that's coming.
All right.
May I respond to that last statement, sir?
The gentleman's recognized for further inquiry.
Just by way of an explanation on the last thing you said, I called Bill Draft and informed him about that misspelling on that other bill, and it was their suggestion to do an amendment, not mine.
No problem.
Okay,
does the gentleman want to withdraw his amendment at this time and consider just filing it tomorrow?
Yes, sir. I'd like to see if there's a way that I can work this back.
Okay. The amendment will be returned to them. Are there any other members who would like to withdraw their amendments at this time? Understanding, gentlemen, and I will tell in the interest of just full disclosure that I believe Representative Jackson has the gentleman withdrawn his amendment. He withdrew okay. Any other members who wish to withdraw their amendments this time? For what purpose does the lady from Franklin, Representative Richardson, rise?
To withdraw my amendment, it was covered with Representative Turner's amendment.
I believe that's, okay, that's 80. Let's see, which one is that?
It's H516.
68. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, the amendment will be returned to the lady. Well, the lady from Forsyth, Representative Terry, for what purpose does the lady rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to do the very same thing, to withdraw the amendment because it was taken care of in Section 7 of the bill by Representative Turner. Thank you.
The amendment will be returned to the lady. For what purpose does the gentleman from Cumberland, Representative Glazier, rise?
To withdraw my amendment, Mr. Speaker. It's a technical amendment and can be authored tomorrow.
Okay. The amendment will be returned to the gentleman as well. For what purpose does the gentleman from Catawba, Representative Adams, rise?
To withdraw my amendment till tomorrow.
The amendment will be withdrawn and returned to the gentleman. For what purpose does the same purpose for the gentleman from Orange?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
The amendment will be returned. For what purpose does the gentleman from Cabarrus, Representative Pittman, does the gentleman just still have his light on, or is the gentleman? Okay.
Mr. Speaker, I was going to, I guess, make a sort of require a suggestion. Relative to our discussion just a minute ago about my amendment correcting the spelling on the previous bill, I wondered if it would be in order if I were to move that we reconsider that amendment so that we can kill it so y'all can just fix it without having an amendment so it can get to the governor faster.
The gentleman could.
I mean, would that be helpful to the process?
We would have to reconsider the final passage of the bill and then reconsider the passage of the amendment.
Okay.
Maybe at this point, maybe just as well.
Might make it worse to try to
let it. I would let it lie. I would suggest the gentleman not make the motion.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Speaker. For what purpose does the lady from Buckham, Representative Fisher, rise?
For a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Lady may state her point of order.
I am noticing a lot of folks withdrawing amendments to have them redone tomorrow. Can we leave the amendments that are currently being held by the clerk on for tomorrow if they are not ruled out of order?
Yeah, the answer is yeah. It's that would be more of a parliamentary inquiry, not a point of order. But the answer to the lady's question is yes. However, given that there have been some substantive amendments adopted, it might be in order for members to take another look anyway because page numbers and all that sort of thing have changed. So I would encourage all members to take a look at the amendments they filed because there are going to be technical changes that are necessary. Probably the best bet is for all the members to simply withdraw their amendments or members to withdraw their amendments and then to get with staff and make sure that they're going to be consistent because one of the things once we have the second reading on this bill, assuming it passes, the chair is going to direct that the amendments be engrossed so that the version of the bill that is before the body tomorrow incorporates all of the amendments that would have been adopted on second reading.
Follow up?
The lady's recognized for a follow-up.
Would you be willing to reveal to us which of the amendments will be ruled out of order, of the ones that you have so far?
I don't want to spoil the surprise for tomorrow.
Follow up?
The lady's recognized for a follow-up.
It might save staff a little bit of time and trouble. This is part of my concern.
Well, the chair reviewed some. The chair will not make a ruling on an amendment until we're before the proper body or the proper version of the bill. So in all candor, I think it would be premature to do that. The chair will say that had the chair had to rule on a number of amendments today on second reading, there were a few that were going to be ruled out of order. But it appears we're not going to have to deal with that at the moment.
Then I would like to withdraw my amendment to have it reauthored for tomorrow.
The lady's amendment will be returned to her.
Thank you.
Is that the same? What person? The lady from Guilford?
Oh, sorry.
The same request, please.
Same from Representative Cunningham as well? Okay. Let me ask you, is there anybody who objects to their amendments being returned to them? That's it. There you go. All right. At this time, the chair will permit, if there's any folks who want to debate the bill, We're about to vote on second reading, but there is no previous question. The floor is open for debate on the bill. Further discussion, further debate? If not, the question before the House is the passage of House Bill 562 on its second reading. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. Clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. 78 having voted in the affirmative and 37 in the negative. House Bill 562 passes its second reading and will, without objection. Objection having been heard, will remain on the counter for third reading. And the bill is ordered engrossed as to the amendments.